SABC News. Very good morning to you. There's Kendall. He's good to go. I'm Evan Jansen and I'm with Elvis President on this Monday morning, bringing you, well, an interesting day's news ahead, Elvis.
Very interesting day. Things are happening in this country, especially here in Johannesburg as well as in Megawatt Park. But in Johannesburg, of course, there are people that's going to march today, Evan.
They say the atmosphere is electric outside Megawatt Park this morning. But we're looking back also with our theme today a little bit to last week, Elvis. It was a big news debut and a big news story was, of course, the deterioration of race relations within the town of Kolini.
Yes.
But we're escalating that discussion today.
We're escalating that discussion. We want to find out a little bit more. We were bound to speak to the Premier as well today to find out what's happening in his province and what is going on there. Now, the small hidden dorpie like Kolini, where violence erupted after a young boy was killed. You remember that story? And this is the undertones of divisions of racial tensions in South Africa, we were told. Now, that's why we're asking this question.
We put the poll up because it's always nice to gauge the mood in South Africa, and we ask you, are you concerned as a parent, as a teacher, as a mother, as a father, are you concerned that race relations in South Africa are deteriorating? And we put the hashtag up, the Elvis Dorpies, because it seems Dorpies are becoming the new forefront.
The new forefront, and of course small, and they sort of isolated, and that is where it's happening. We also have race relations there, and that's what we want to find out from you, engage from you. 170 votes in 86% of you are saying, yes, we are concerned that race relations are deteriorating.
Colonizor tweets us, he says, above all, our government is in a silent mood. Racism is all over the place but ignored, and our courts exacerbate the situation, says Ifananatso.
He continues, he says, we need to find each other. Everything was bottled, it was brushed. A Rainbow Nation forgetting to heal the mind, the psychological oppression that we faced. And, you know, that is something that we probably also got to look into.
Yep, it's the therapy that we all need to undertake. Peter Mofokeng tweets us, he says, unfortunately, we are not making good progress, as we should. People still judge matters or action based on skin color. Spot on there, Peter. Happens every day.
Alex Matapo says, really, nowadays, we're scared to talk. We are not in a good relation at all.
Trust, he talks about trust. There's no more trust. That is scary. We need to rebuild the trust. Ricardo Peterson tweets us, this Newsroom, if there's no race relation certainty, there would be no tolerance and humanity. It must be restored with urgency. And I think it means it's all of our duty, isn't it?
All of our duties, and how do we do that? That's another question. Jacob says, South African culture promotes violence against women. The communities do not stand firmly against this gender abuse. Another social ill that he's pointing out there, Evan.
Yeah, men are trash and femicide. We're going to put it together and talk about it on Wednesday. Men are trash. I'm not very comfortable with that, but that's not for today. That's for late in the world. This one from Sitka Mundiko says, Newsroom, a dialogue is needed urgently to address race relations in South Africa. I agree.
Lots of people talking about CODESA 3 to come forward and talk to us about that. So these are some of the topics, or some of the comments that you're sending through on a question that we post to you on our poll. But we're also conducting asking a question. Yeah,
Megawatt Park is electrified. This morning, as 5 COPE supporters are apparently toying outside the entrance. But this is our question. Eskom's Brian Molefe goes back to work today. What are your views? Well, we know they're varied and wide-ranging. Please tweet us, tell us what you think. But there's a whole host of news for us to get through this morning. Hopefully we get an update there from Megawatt Park shortly. Yep. Let's get the headlines.
All eyes on the Constitutional Court as parties and civil society will march to hear arguments in the UDM's application to carry out a secret ballot in the motion of no confidence in the president. The Democratic Alliance has given the NPA until today to decide whether or not the president will be prosecuted, or the NPA will prosecute the president for his role in the Nkandla corruption scandal. And as you heard there, Brian Molefe, he is expected to return to his Eskom CEO position today, despite heavy criticism from political parties and unions. Now, those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall what happened over the weekend. It was chock-a-block, it seems like, Kendall.
Yeah, all the way from Friday afternoon all the way into this morning. It's been amazing. But just on our question of the day about the race relations, 50 years on, the United States is still struggling with serious race issues.
Yeah.
And I think South Africa now, should we sort it out? Should we get it right?
You mentioned something very important. As South Africans, we have a very internal, inward view, and not a very world view. And we need to develop our world view a little bit to see that our problems are maybe not as insurmountable as other people in other countries battle with the same thing.
100%.
And almost halfway there.
We're almost halfway there, but we know we stand primed to be the true standard bearer of how race relations can work if we get it right.
On point.
Yeah. So good morning to you. Besides the race relations and the big, heavy questions that we've got for you for today to deal with on the show, this is what else we've got for you in the sports today. The Blitzboks are a paragon of world dominance as they win gold in Paris and get crowned world champions with a tournament to spare.
The perfect weekend in Paris. Gold medal winners and now crowned the best sevens team in the world, South Africa.
Akasipana ngepena asipana ndalithuba wasebenza unozinkonda kalakasungula Kalakata.
Thunder Royal Zulu will be playing in the PSL next season, win the NFD title with a record 62 points.
It's his 55th win in Formula One. Hamilton wins the Spanish Grand Prix and closes the championship gap to 6 points as Sebastian Vettel comes home in second.
Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton closes the gap at the top of the F1 driver standings after winning a thriller of a tactical showdown with title contender Sebastian Vettel of Ferrari in Spain. All this and more we've got for you later on the Sports Bulletin. Be sure to stick around for it. Do stay with Elvis because he's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this morning. Opposition parties and civil society are expected to join forces this morning and lead a protest march to the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg. Now, they've called on South Africans to join the march. Meanwhile, the Constitutional Court will hear arguments today on whether a secret ballot should be conducted when parliamentarians vote on a motion of no confidence against the President, Jacob Zuma.
The UDM filed the application to the Constitutional Court. The party says it's confident that the highest court in the land will rule in its favor. President Jacob Zuma, however, maintains that the court has no jurisdiction to hear the application. He argues that the Constitution doesn't make provision for a secret vote against a sitting president. Opposition parties say because the President and Speaker of Parliament are voted into office by a secret ballot in Parliament, and that a vote to remove them should also be done in secret. On the other hand, the UDM argues that some ANC MPs have received death threats amid speculation that they might vote with the opposition parties to have the president removed.
Story that's linked. Our reporter Griselda Lewis is at the Mary Fitzgerald Square here in Newtown, Johannesburg, where the march to the Constitutional Court is expected to start. Let's join her now. Very good morning to you, Griselda, and welcome. Can you tell us what is the situation like there this morning? Have people started gathering?
Well, that's right, Elvis. From as early as 7 o'clock this morning, opposition members and supporters had already started arriving here at the Mary Fitzgerald Square. The pictures that you are seeing now of some of those supporters and members, as well as ordinary South Africans who are urged to come here and support this march to the Constitutional Court. Number one, calling for President Jacob Zuma to resign, and also asking the Comport to compel the National Assembly Speaker Baleka Mbete to conduct that no confidence vote against President Jacob Zuma through a secret ballot. Well, that march is expected to start any minute now as we wait for more members of the opposition parties to arrive here. But of course, we're expecting the arguments in the Constitutional Court, of course, from the UDM, as you indicated, to really argue that, ANC members have been threatened, members of Parliament have been threatened as a result of the motion that they are now asking the Constitutional Court to rule on whether a secret ballot will go ahead in the National Assembly when this motion does get heard. And of course, President Jacob Zuma, in the papers that he has filed, saying that there's no merit or basis for this application to be heard because they believe that the open vote itself is not unconstitutional. And the National Assembly Speaker as well, Balai Kambete, saying that there is no basis at this point, given the fact that, for example, you have a jurisdiction in terms of what she can do, that the Constitution and the rules of the National Assembly do not make provision for a secret ballot. Let's join now very quickly. The UDM MP, Ngabayonzi Nkwangwa, was also going to be part of this march here this morning. Mr. Nkwangwa, thank you very much for your time this morning. A very important day for the UDM and I guess for other opposition parties as well, asking the Constitutional Court to compel the National Assembly to have this secret ballot when this vote of no confidence sits in Parliament.
Yes, no, certainly. I think it's an important day, not only for us as sister opposition parties, but I think it's an important day for South Africa as a whole. Because remember, really what we're trying to do as a party and as an opposition collective is to say, effectively, South Africa needs to find itself. For an example, what we've been saying over the past few weeks is that not only do we find ourselves in a situation where we need to look for our road as a country, but we also need to look for a direction as to say, where do we take the country from here? So we're saying this Constitutional Court process, without putting pressure on the Constitutional Court judges, but we feel that they also have a moral obligation to lead the country, to help to get the country out of this quagmire, by at the very least saying to Parliament that we need to do something about the discretionary powers that the Speaker has, and so far as being able to decide whether a vote can be conducted on a secret ballot or not.
In terms of the papers that were filed, the National Assembly Speaker does indicate, saying that the rules, there's no rules within the National Assembly or the Constitution, neither does that provide for a secret ballot when it comes to a vote of no confidence. What are the main arguments that the UDM's lawyers will be putting through to the Constitutional Court to try perhaps and get this successful?
Look, without preempting the Constitutional Court process once more, I think we've made it clear, for an example, that the Speaker, who also admitted in the papers that she does have some discretionary powers to make that decision, we need to force her to make that decision, firstly, by the Constitutional Court process. But the second matter is that even though the rules do not state it explicitly, you can use a secret ballot via motion of no confidence, but if you elect the very same president via secret ballot, then it's only logical and proper that you can also remove him via secret ballot should the need arise. For an example, I mean, you've seen over the past few weeks, ever since we started with this Constitutional Court process, that a lot of people have been intimidated, there have been threats on people's lives. So you can't put their lives at risk by saying vote in favor of a motion if either they are going to be removed from Parliament or they are going to lose their lives or might lose their lives by doing so.
I want to come to exactly that, the threats of intimidation and death threats. Publicly, ANC MP Makosi Khoza has come out and said, since she's spoken out and supported a secret ballot, that perhaps, do you think other ANC MPs, part of the reason why you're doing this is to call on ANC MPs to vote with their so-called conscience to get rid of President Jacob Zuma. Do you think there is enough will, though, within the ANC in terms of the members of Parliament to vote with you as opposition members to get rid of President Jacob Zuma?
Well, yes, now there is a lot of will from our ANC MPs, the colleagues. I mean, as ordinary members of Parliament, we've been interacting on this issue. You do find that there's a groundswell of discontent in the ANC against President Zuma, and they would like to make sure that they use the secret ballot process as one of the ways of expressing that discontent. We are providing them an opportunity to therefore do that using the secret ballot. But at the same time, I think the issue is that now they need to be true to the Constitution. Remember, when you take your oath of office, you do so in terms of Section 48 of the Constitution, and you swear and affirm allegiance to the Constitution of the Republic and its people. Now, it means that we have to put South Africa first and forget about our own political parties at this point in time.
But some analysts would perhaps say that, we saw President Jacob Zuma come under much scrutiny over the cabinet reshuffle. Yes, there has been public dissent amongst some ANC members with regard to the recent decisions that President Jacob Zuma has made. But President Jacob Zuma just yesterday also indicating that he will not step down unless his party says he should. Now, other opposition parties have said they do not see that will coming from within the ANC. It had the opportunity to get rid of President Jacob Zuma, but it did not. Do you think perhaps that, the dissent that we've seen within the African National Congress may not necessarily translate to ANC MPs voting with you, because some would say perhaps the members of parliament would want the ANC internally to deal with President Jacob Zuma.
The ANC has tried on numerous occasions to deal with President Zuma internally, and it has failed dismally. We must face that fact. I think the president of the country, or the ANC rather, not of the country, Zuma, still enjoys a lot of support in the ANC NEC. But I think the political dynamics are slightly different in parliament. It is up to the ANC if they want to do that. They want to give more time to President Zuma to continue to politically amputate the African National Congress. That's entirely up to them. We'll see them at the ballot box in 2019. But what we're saying is that we cannot allow President Zuma to lead us for another 2 years. It would be disastrous. So we're giving them an opportunity to say, put South Africa first, remove President Zuma, so that we can then begin the process of trying to rebuild the country.
We've also seen other opposition parties say they were wooing ANC MPs to vote with opposition parties on the day that the vote of no confidence does come. Have you also been involved in that process?
Yes, of course. As I think all sister opposition parties are involved in that. You know, you do it informally, not formally. For example, what we have been doing from the UDM side is to focus mainly on those MPs, ordinary MPs who are not members of the executive, because we find that in many instances the members of the executive are conflicted, because they know that if you remove President Zuma, it means you've also removed them as well. So they lose all the benefits and perks of being members of the executive. So our focus so far has been on ordinary MPs, and we're going to continue to do so until this matter is debated in Parliament and a separate ballot is used.
The UDM MP, thank you very much for your time. Certainly the UDM hoping for some success at the Constitutional Court this morning, as those arguments are expected to get underway. Of course, they're the UDM bringing that application, wanting the Constitutional Court to compel the National Assembly Speaker, Baleka Mbete, to have that no confidence vote against President Jacob Zuma held in secret ballot, saying that would perhaps provide an opportunity for ANC MPs to vote with their conscience against President Jacob Zuma to get him removed. Let's cross now to my colleague Aldrin Sampier, who is at the Constitutional Court where those hearings will take place. Aldrin?
Well, actually, the leader of the UDM, Bantu Holomisa, is actually inside the courtroom ahead of today's heads of arguments that will be heard here at the Constitutional Court. Of course, quite an interesting case on both fronts. Quite interesting that you'll have the heads of all arms of the state. This is now the executive, being the president being represented by his council, as well as the Speaker of Parliament, also represented by a council. But also you'll have Chief Justice Mogoeng also part of this case, or rather listening in or hearing in on this court application being brought by the UDM. So quite an interesting times that South Africa finds himself in terms of our democracy. Of course, what is at the center of the UDM's court application is to have the vote of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma to be done in secret. And they base this argument on what they call intimidation, as well as death threats against ANC MPs, who some believe are ANC MPs who will vote against President Jacob Zuma, who will support the UDM as well as the DA and the EFF's motion of no confidence debate in Parliament, and they will vote with them to get President Jacob Zuma removed as the president of the country. But what we should do is also, when you read section 102 of the Constitution, where it speaks about the removal of the president through a motion of no confidence, is that it says that once the president is being removed through a motion of no confidence, it also means that the cabinet members, as well as all deputy ministers, must resign. So this will have a huge impact in terms of the executive, because not only would the president have to resign, but the entire cabinet, the entire executive as well, will have to step down. That would obviously mean that we'll be in for a reshuffle. That is, if the UDM as well as the opposition parties are lucky, or are successful rather, in making their arguments, and also successful in the motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma. Something quite interesting as well is that while the ANC has been cited as a respondent in this matter, it has decided not to file court papers. However, though, President Jacob Zuma, in his court application, introduces himself as the president of the country as well as the president of the ANC, also making the arguments around when party members do not toe the line. There are provisions within the ANC's constitution that those party members must be disciplined, and that cannot be seen to be a form of intimidation. He says it's not the ANC's constitution that's being tested here at during this court application, but rather the issue around the motion of no confidence against the president being done in secret. The president says that the constitution as it stands at the moment doesn't have any provision for that, while the UDM says that if you read section 102 of the constitution, it says that the president can be removed by quote unquote by a vote. It doesn't say whether it is a secret vote or a closed vote. Something else as well is that President Jacob Zuma, in his heads of argument, said that the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, the deputy president of the ANC, as well as Gwede Mantashe, the secretary general of the ANC, have decided, have publicly apologized for speaking out against President Jacob Zuma's decision to reshuffle cabinet. We've heard subsequently that Gwede Mantashe has said that that is not the case. So we'll have to wait and see whether the council representing the president will actually retract that statement, because they've said it in the heads of arguments that these two ANC members have made public apologies, and Gwede Mantashe saying that that is not the case. Even Derek Hanekom, who was part of the ANC's National Working Committee's extended meeting after the cabinet reshuffle, says that there was no apology asked from anyone and there was no apology made. So the question around whether an apology was given is false at this point. So we'll have to wait and see whether the council of the president will retract this. Something that was interesting that was just raised by someone on Twitter is if you look into the facts that the ANC has decided not to file in this court application. However, though, President Jacob Zuma filing both as president of the country as well as president of the ANC, the question then is, who must foot the bill? Who must foot the legal bill? Because the taxpayer cannot be expected to foot the bill of the ANC when arguments are being advanced in the interest of the ANC. While President Jacob Zuma, as being the president of the country, of course, if he filed in his capacity as the president of the country, it is expected that the taxpayers would foot the bill. However, when he advances arguments on behalf of the ANC, it must be the ANC that foots that bill. So quite an interesting take on the events that will be unfolding this morning here at the Constitutional Court.
That's our reporter there, Eldrin Sampier from the Constitutional Court. We'll bring you an update on that story as it unfolds as the march progresses to the Constitutional Court later. Meanwhile, Brian Molefe is expected to return to his Eskom CEO position this morning. That's 5 months after he was implicated in the Public Protector's State of Capture report. Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown has been summoned to Luthuli House today for a meeting to discuss the Eskom board's reappointment of Brian Molefe as the CEO. Reports suggest that Brown has been told to either fire Molefe or dissolve the parastatal's board. The ANC has rejected Molefe's reappointment, describing it as reckless. The rand fell on Friday when the Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown announced the decision to reappoint Molefe, and the move has been heavily criticized by the opposition parties and unions. COPE says it plans to block entrances to Megawatt Park today to prevent Molefe from entering the premises. The Helen Suzman Foundation believes that his reappointment reduces the validity of the country's constitutional process.
Is that the only solution, that he goes back to Eskom? Being in Parliament for 4 months, not saying a word, seems to me to in some ways reduce the validity of our constitutional process and the legislature. Parliament shouldn't just be a dumping ground for people that people don't know what to do with. That I think we should all be concerned about. Having said that, let's see what the legal processes are. Let's see whether the rule of law is broken, and let's see if there's any corruption about that.
Now let's see if we can get hold of our reporter on the same story, Maslako Komani, who is at Megawatt Park, the Eskom headquarters. A very good morning to you, Maslako.
Good morning.
Moslako, can you tell us what is happening there at the moment? We believe that COPE members were going to be at the entrances of Eskom this morning. Are they there?
We actually have a couple of people from COPE that are here, including people from or members of the Democratic Alliance that are here to try and prevent Mr. Brian Molefe from accessing the premises here at the head office of Eskom in Megawatt Park. But our sources tell us that Mr. Molefe actually beat the picket, and he was here since 4 a.m. this morning, and he's been in meetings. But these we are yet to confirm if indeed he is. We're not getting any word from Eskom spokesperson. We're still trying to verify those rumors that Mr. Molefe actually has already begun his duties. He's hit the ground running as CEO. I'm sure he must be very excited to be back. But I have Mr. Mufokeng here. He's with COPE in the province. He's just going to be telling us what is it that they're hoping to achieve here today, especially now that we are hearing that Mr. Molefe has actually already made his way in, waking up as early as 4 a.m. to start his meetings. Mr. Mufokeng, thank you so much for talking to us. Can you just please tell us, now that we're hearing sources that Mr. Molefe is here, what is the way forward?
Well, the way forward is to conscientize our people, is to make sure that everybody gets the right message of what is happening here at Eskom. Eskom being a public asset, we have direct interest in what is happening here. And we don't want to allow people to run this institution as if it's a private institution or it belongs to individuals. So our aim is to mobilize as many people as possible. And we are not going to stop doing that today. We are going to continuously talking to people and until Mr. Brian Molefe realizes that he has to leave this important institution that is linked to our economy in South Africa.
And how long are you planning on staying outside here? Any other measures that you're going to try and take? Because we do know that the DA has approached the High Court in Pretoria to have Mr. Molefe's appointment set aside.
Well, we are also in support of what the DA is doing, and our national structure is actually speaking to DA to link our case with what they are doing. And answering the question of how long are we going to be here, unfortunately today we'll be under pressure because we have to go to the Concord and join other parties that are happening there, that are marching there. So we will be here for about an hour, and then after this we are moving back to Concord, but we will continuously oppose what Mr. Brian Molefe and the board of Eskom are trying to do to us.
Well, we lost the link there. That's our reporter on the scene, Moslako Khumani, speaking to one of the 5 people at the gates of Eskom this morning. Well, as you know, we're asking a very important question this morning and relates to the issue in Koleni. We're conducting a poll. Let's take a look at that poll and where it stands right now. And you can see what is happening now. 189 votes in Eben. 86% of the people in South Africa and the continent of Africa are saying we are concerned that race relations are deteriorating here in South Africa. 14% are saying no. But there's a lot of fear.
No doubt that it's a concern that I think most South Africans are uncomfortable about when towns start to square up against each other along racial lines. It is a definite red light that goes up. Khogelo Mala says, Newsroom, the only people concerned about this race issue is us blacks. That's why didn't you see whites at court in the Northwest condemning the killing? It's these kinds of sentiments that's concerning.
Andila says, having lost all the grounds and failed to provide on all the promises, the ANC has decided to peddle racism.
This one from Ikononase says, above all, our government is on a silent mood. Racism is all over the place but ignored, and our courts exacerbate the situation. Interesting.
Ricardo Peterson says, if there's no race relations certainty, there would be no tolerance and humanity. It must be restored with urgency.
I think that's a sense of the 86% on the poll. Sipho Mthembu says, yes, 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 until our government, court, civil society speak to each other to restore the trust of this country like others. talk about trust in the executive. We see
the trust deficit really that we see in this country, yes. But we're also conducting a poll on another matter that needs our attention. And that question, as you can see on your screen right now, we're asking you about Brian Molefe. He's going back to work today. We want to know your views. Let's take a look at what you have to say.
Alex tweets us, he says, the public protector has to come in and help this country from a corruption sea, says Alex.
Jacob says, politics is playing a role in this controversial Brian and Eskom saga. Molefe has the right to choose between being an MP or a CEO.
Sipho Mtembo says, if he's not guilty of any charges, why not going back to his posts? And he rescued the country from load shedding as well. Yeah, those are the tweets of us. These are the questions, these are the main stories, but of course, the most concerning one, I think, for many South Africans, as we saw from the poll, is the deterioration of race relations, especially in our small towns. And we saw that last week, and that's what we're looking at. Now, Kolini was the epicenter. Yes, Kolini, a small farming town situated near Lichtenburg here in the Northwest Province, has been known as one of the peaceful, quiet places in the province. But recently, it's been put right in the spotlight following the death of 16-year-old Matlomola Mosweu. The boy was allegedly killed by two white men, Peter Duravaart and Philip Skitter, for stealing sunflowers. Then followed violent protests where residents indiscriminately looted local businesses and burnt some residential properties belonging to white residents. Let's look back.
A race war looming in Kolini. Angry residents brought this tiny farming town to a standstill following Matlomola Mosweu's death. Mosweu died on 20 April, allegedly in the hands of these two men. Furious residents want justice for Mosweu.
I want to see the justice must be served to these guys because they always kill the people.
We were supposed to come to the police and report the child rather than killing the child.
That man must not granted bail. And we don't want that thing that he wants blanket at jail. It's not right.
And it quickly became evident that these were not empty threats. Shortly after the murder, Peter Duravaart, 27, and Philip Skitter, 34, appeared at the Kolini Magistrates Court. In court, the accused said they caught Mosweu and his teenage friend stealing sunflower seeds. They then caught Mosweu while his friend managed to run away. They then ordered Mosweu onto the back of their bakkie to report him to the police. According to their version, Mosweu jumped off the vehicle and broke his neck. But another version emerged, contradicting the accused story. The version put forward by a nameless black man who says he saw Skitter and Duravaart beating the black boy, threatening to murder him if he told anyone. The two accused were later released on bail of 5,000 rands each. And with this judgment, the protest quickly escalated. An angry mob burned a house on the farm Raidgale, where the boy had allegedly stolen sunflowers. Two other houses were also set alight. Non-protesting residents say they have lost all they have in the looting and now live in absolute fear. Some resorted to firing live ammunition to disperse the protesters.
We are worried about our children, our women, and the old people there.
I've always been a right-winger. And you know what? After 95, and we won the World Cup, I thought to myself, maybe you were wrong. And I think to myself, I will participate in building a new South Africa. Can you tell me if it's possible when something like that is happening to you?
Amidst this chaos, Mosweu was laid to rest on Sunday at his home in Scotland informal settlement in Colini. Mosweu's grieving parents say it will take time for them to accept his death. Silwane Khachau, SABC News, Colini in the Northwest.
Now, our very own reporter, Olebo Nkhoselenchwe, she was in Colini for the entire time. She joins us now in our studio in Mahikeng to talk us a little bit through what's gone on in the Northwest Province. Very good morning to you, Lebo. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Eben.
Lebo, I just want to cut to the chase. Is apartheid and racial hatred, is it still alive and well in the small dorpies in the Northwest Province?
You know, even being there the whole week, I can certainly say that racism is a very serious reality in Colini. Talking to the locals, walking into the local retailers, there is a sense that there is no equality between blacks and whites. You remember that Colini is a very small town. It is a farming town, and therefore most of the shops, most of the facilities are white-owned. And black people work there, and they have no choice but to use those facilities. You find a place where they say, for example, when you're a black person, you cannot enter a shop or a pharmacy when you're speaking on the phone because you're making noise. But a white person can freely walk into the shop making noise as much as they like. So it's a very serious reality, and to a point where black local people are sort of not comfortable, but they have relented. They say this is how we live, and there is no other way because we have no other place to go.
What's the black community saying with regards to this, but also what is happening generally? Is it a scenario of a feeling that these matters are reaching a boiling point?
Yes. The death of Mahlomola Mosweu has actually gotten the black community to say enough is enough. They say that they have had enough of being treated like this by white people on their own land, you know. So I can say that it has reached a boiling point, particularly because they say it is not the first time that such incidents of black children being murdered by white people on the farms has occurred. But it's of importance to notice that they say this was also sparked by the justice system. The granting of bail of Philip Schutte as well as Peter Doornvat was a catalyst in this raging tempers that we experience in Colini at the moment even. So they don't feel very happy about the democracy that we have in our country. They don't feel that anything has changed before the dispensation of democracy in Colini.
Tell me quickly about the Democratic Alliance, who are laying charges, criminal charges, they say, against Premier Supra Mahumapelo with regards to the inciting violence. Is there anything new on that? And tell us a little bit about the reaction from the Premier's office.
Yes, Eben, you remember that on Friday, Premier Supra Mahumapelo went to Colini to participate in a reconciliation, healing and renewal program that was started by his office. And he went there to try to speak to both the white and the black community and really find a way in which they can both sit together and engage and find a way of moving forward. As the Premier was still engaging with those community leaders as well as farmers and business people, we saw the chairperson of the DA, Mr. Joe McClure, in the province, going to the Colini police station where he said he was going to lay a charge. But the amazing thing is that he did not know what charge it is that he was laying. He just said that the utterances made by Premier Mahumapelo at Matlomola's funeral incited violence. But I was there at the funeral, and what I heard the Premier say was that he spoke in Setswana, saying that it is that everybody knows that it's true that when white people came into South Africa, they did not have any land, or neither did they have any sunflower. that Matlomela was allegedly killed for. Now, the DA went to the police station to lay a charge, but later we got a call from the police spokesperson in the province, Brigadier Sabata Mokwabone, telling us that indeed the case was not opened, that the DA now burst out of the police station saying that the people were not treating them fairly and that they would write a statement and hand it over to the police station. But that has not happened. So a case has not been opened. As for the Premier's reaction, he said that, well, it's a democracy. Everybody is entitled to open a case if they feel so. And he said that he was not afraid to go to court and repeat what he said at Matlomola's funeral. So he was very unfazed. He's still waiting for those charges to be laid against him, and as far as we speak, none of that has happened.
Well, Lebo, thank you very much for sharing all the information with us there. Well, Lebo Kheng coming to you live this morning from Mahikeng. Of course, the town of Kalini is in the Northwest Province, and that's where all of the trouble started, they tell you. The Premier was a last-minute withdrawal, actually. He's got to supposedly be in court, I think, today. Anyhow, let's take a look at what's on social media right now. And we'll start with a secret ballot because the opposition parties, members and others, they are already at Mary Fitzgerald Square. As you saw there this morning, the Constitutional Court will hear arguments on whether a secret ballot should be conducted when parliamentarians vote on a motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma. Then, of course, we just spoke about Kalini. The town has been tense over the weekend. Of course, this after violent protests and a court case there last week following the death of a teen. However, all seems calm today, this morning, they say, with schools returning back to normal. However, South Africans are relentless with their protesting. They are protesting, rallying outside Eskom this morning as they didn't want Brian Molefe to arrive there for duty. They feel he was unfairly reappointed back to his top position. We've been told that, well, Brian Molefe beat him to the punch, arrived there before 4 a.m. this morning. Yesterday, of course, was the day that Beliebers, that's Justin Bieber's fans, have been participating in South Africa. Many braved the rainy weather to stand in queues to get to his concert. And it was, well, a marvelous turnout for the Beliebers. There you have, wonderful picture there. Hashtag Justin Bieber. Now, our picture of the day, as we move on, our picture of the day comes from Cricket Chit Chat, and this was the man, well, he kind of blew them all away this weekend, Quinton de Kock. Quinny de Kock, South African Cricket of the Year, One Day Cricket of the Year, Players Player of the Year, Fans Player of the Year, all of them. There's 6 trophies, actually, in front of him, including the big one on your screen left. That is for South Africa's Cricketer of the Year 2017, Quinton de Kock. Well done. Our comment of the day, this one comes from Amadou, who says, according to South African statistics, men are more likely to kill women than cancer is. Let that sink in. Talk about men are trash. We're going there on Wednesday. Men are trash and femicide. We're going to deal with that. Anyhow, let's take a roundup around the courts. All the cases of interest to you. That will be heard today in Bloemfontein, where the Danish national Peter Frederiksen's trial is expected to begin once again. Of course, you'll remember he's accused of mutilating several women, including his now deceased wife. He allegedly collected female genitalia and stored them in his freezer in his house in Bloemfontein. Then in Durban, judgment is expected in the case involving a farmer who allegedly killed cattle because they were overgrazing the land. Then in Witbank, in Mpumalanga, a bail hearing for a serial rapist accused of 35 counts of rape is expected to be heard in the Magistrates Court there in Witbank. And here in Johannesburg, Brandon Lee and Tony Lee Tulsi, dubbed the Terror Twins, they're expected to be back in the Magistrates Court here. Both face 11 counts, including contravention of the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorists and Related Activities Act. Now, a 12th charge of fraud is also now being added. We'll keep you updated on the development in all of these cases. First, going to take a break. When we come back, we talk about race relations. Don't go away.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Now, as you know, we're conducting that poll this morning. We want to find out and we want to gauge the picture here in South Africa in relation to race relations. And let's take a look at what the poll suggests right now. As you can see on your screen there, 189 votes are in. 86% of people in South Africa saying they are concerned that race relations are deteriorating in South Africa. There's also the hashtag Dorpies, and specifically small Dorpies, and see what is happening there. Hashtag transformation, hashtag race relations. Let's take a look at what you are saying on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. We'll come back with some of those tweets a little bit later, but the death of Mahlamola Moshweu in Kolini put the issue of race relations in South Africa in the spotlight in recent weeks. Now, this was after 2 white men were alleged to have killed Mahlamola Moshweu by pushing him out of a moving bakkie. Moshweu's death was followed by protest as black Kolini residents accused their white counterparts of racism. Now, the question we also pose are, as South Africans, are we on the right track when it comes to race relations? To find out more, we are joined by Cohen Labone from the Institute of Race Relations. A very good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Good morning to you, Elvis, and your viewers.
First and foremostly, you did a field study by the South African Institute of Race Relations in 2016 that indicated that more than 50% of South Africans felt that race relations have improved. Is that still the case?
Yes, that study was done last year, so that was the case until then. What incidents like the Kolini incidents have the effect of doing in the country is to reverse those gains and really polarize a society along racial lines, because they have been frequent, especially the Twitter incidents that occurred last year. So there's a concern that as more of these incidents are reported and come out, they will have the effect of reversing the gains that have been since 1994 as regards to race relations, yes.
When you talk about the gains, what does that mean in relation to race relations, black vis-a-vis white?
We come from a history of racial segregation, and after 1994 we had leadership that really tried to improve the situation by really talking to white and black people to come together. So there has been thawing of relations in terms of between black and white people. And which is why we did the study, because there was a concern that there were particularly leadership across the political spectrum sometimes made statements that they had the effect of polarizing society along racial lines. And we did the study to find out if how far we are from 1994, and which is the results, we discussed them here in this very show. They show that there's a significant improvement in terms of race relations. But like I say, it only takes one incident to undo all the gains that have been.
We're going to come back to that incident right now. I just want you to remind us again, what was the sample size of that study, and was it conducted in these type of small dorpies where we see this violence escalates?
Well, yes, the results, it was over 2,000 households, individuals across, representative of the entire country. And yes, we did the study across the entire country, urban areas as well as rural areas. So it was actually a representative study in that regard.
Now, there were these race clashes in Kolini last week. Why does it seem, though, that especially in these small towns, surrounded by farms in the area, that we still see racially divided communities?
You can make an example with, you can compare that to urban areas. You know, in urban areas, a lot of our economic growth is in urban centers, and Johannesburg, Cape Town and Durban and so on, which is why we've always said that if you improve the economy in those small dorpies, you will actually have better race relations. Because why I'm saying this is because the economic relations in small dorpies remain largely unchanged, and which is why maybe there might be a difficulty there in terms of improving race relations than you can do in an urban area.
Why is that?
As I said, economic relations stay the same, and there is no inclination on someone who's looked at their employer as inferior to change that perception if that person doesn't improve if the person's economic situation doesn't change. But if you have a place where, like in an urban area, where you have, you know, you've had programs like the Black Economic Empowerment that have improved, and you've seen black managers in urban centers and so on, there's a more likelihood of race relations changing in that kind of situation than you would have in a small dorp.
You've seen some of the inserts we had a little bit earlier. Farmers are suggesting that they tried, because they were right-wingers, they tried since 1994 to change. But how can they change when they have violence in their communities perpetrated against them and their businesses? What do you make of that?
Well, as I said, the violence occurred after the death of, and the reporter did say that it was a relatively peaceful town before the incident happened. So it's a reaction, and like I said, it takes one incident and reactions, and also, as I said, leadership across the political spectrum, when this incident they have a responsibility not to pour fuel into the fire by making statements that might further polarize societies.
Cameron, from the Institute of Race Relations, what can be done to mend these relations? And I'm talking specifically about these small dorpies, because I've been to a number of small dorpies in this country and I know them very well. And you would find that these issues are prevalent in terms of race division and relations.
Firstly, the initiative by the Premier of Northwest, Mr. Mauma Pelo, it's a very commendable initiative to try and promote social cohesion, those kind of things. But also, ultimately, as we say, to try and speed up economic development in those areas to lift the standard of people so that these incidents can really not be as prevalent as they are.
Is South Africa on the right track in relation to race relations, you think?
Look, these incidents are making headlines precisely because they are not the norm, they are not commonplace, which is why when they occur, they make headlines. And we are saying that we are on the right track, and we should try by all means to make sure that we do not, particularly our leadership from community levels to national level, that we do not say anything that might further strain relations between races.
What is your message to South Africans out there listening to this program today, watching it and asking themselves, can I reconcile with my white or black counterpart?
We are a country of miracles. We come there. We were on the brink of disaster before 1994. We overcame that. We should use the same spirit to try and move ahead.
Kerwin, I thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Joining us. That was Mr. Kerwin Lebone. He's from the Institute of Race Relations, talking to us about race relations in South Africa. Now, we're going to continue this, and we're going to read some of your tweets, and you're going to let us know what's in your mind. But before I do that, let me just remind you, the Constitutional Court will be sitting this morning in relation to the case of that the UDM has brought to the court. They want a vote of no confidence with a secret ballot. We'll keep you updated. There's the live pictures coming through, as you can see it there, and we'll bring you an update. But we're also asking you a question, of course, this morning. Let's take a look at your question, what we're posing to you. Eskom CEO Brian Molefe is back at work. We want to know what's your views. Let's take a look what you are tweeting us this morning. This one coming in from All About Having Fun, DJ Scumto. He says, South Africa is moving forward in reverse gear. Hashtag Brian Molefe. This one from Peter Mofokeng says, from Eskom to Parliament, and shortly from Parliament back to Eskom. That's foul play here. Oh, he suspected that, Peter Mofokeng. Sipho says, as he did resign, not retire from his post, why did Eskom not fill his post immediately? By then, what took them so long? Good question there, Sipho Mthembu. This one from Alex Mutapo says, the Eskom board should be dissolved like that of the other ones. Molefe must go back to where he belongs. This one from Sipho Mthembu, he comes back and says, why are we stopping him in going to his job? Did he kill anyone or someone? No, there are killers out here who do as they please. So you should let Brian Molefe go. That's essentially what Sipho is saying. So what's your take on this? Let us know what's on your mind on the Twitter handle as well as on the Facebook page. And let's take a look at what's happening on the newspapers and the front page from around the globe. And we start off in Europe. May gives all the workers new rights there to time off. This Times report that the employees will be promised today the right to take up to a year off from work to care for family members with illness or disability. What do you make of that? A year off. Moving to New York, the Wall Street Journal says that the symbolism could hardly be clearer. This as Emmanuel Macron will spend his first full day as the President of France in Berlin, visiting the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. There he says Macron becomes President, pledges to bolster Europe. And then finally in Israel, the Jerusalem Post reports that billionaire casino magnate Sheldon Adelson is reportedly furious by comments made by the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson after America's top diplomat appeared to waver on the U.S. president's pledge to relocate the U.S. embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's according to the online publication Axios this morning. Netanyahu publicly disputes Tillerson on U.S. embassy. Those are some of the newspapers from around the globe. We keep you posted on all of those. But for now, we'll be taking a break and we'll be right back after that, so you don't want to miss any of it. After the 10 o'clock news, we will be speaking to AfriForum in relation to the race issues in Colini. They've deployed some security personnel in that area. We want to know why. Stay tuned.
Do you support the calls made by Bladen Nzimande and Solly Mapaila?
It is not a call by Comrade Solly Mapaila and Comrade Bladen Nzimande. It is the position of the party.
Yes.
And the position of the party, we support it unambiguously.
Why?
The theory of the revolution, in simple terms, was that revolutionary forces are going to take charge of the state. And having taken charge of the state, they are going to transform the state to eventually transform society.
Join me in Port Sedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
After a horrific accident, major questions were asked.
So step one, I asked myself, do I really want to die? And my answer to that was, I'm not sure. And then step two was, do I want my parents to bury me? And the answer to that was no.
Learning kept his brain in full action on how the brain works.
When I was in hospital, right, as I was saying, to catch up with my peers, I started to become obsessed with memory techniques and how the brain works and how we retain information.
Touching lives is his continuous mission.
I now work for a non-profit where we deal with access issues regarding kids with disabilities and persons with disability. We're busy working on beach access.
Being wheelchair-bound did not stop fun in his life.
I party in a wheelchair. I laugh in a wheelchair, I smile in a wheelchair.
For all your uplifting stories, catch Bupilong every Friday.
Now you're back with us. Yeah, it's gone 10 o'clock Central African time, mind you. I'm with Kendall Mathematics. Morning, Kendall.
Very interesting topic once again that you're starting the week with.
Yeah, interesting one, but also a very concerning one. I think it's something that we need a lot more discussion on. Anyhow, we've been conducting a poll on the small dorpies like we've seen in Kalini, where race violence erupted recently. We're running a poll and we're asking whether race relations are deteriorating.
And it's very interesting how many people have actually, taken to their computers and actually responded. 216 votes are in already, Yevon?
Yeah, interesting. And it's an overwhelming yes, we are concerned that race relations are deteriorating in South Africa, which means we all have work to do, Kendall, because it's not something that you can palm off, but the next person must take responsibility for this. I think we all need to improve our personal race relations.
I couldn't agree with you more that it starts right here where I stand with me.
Sipo tweets us, he says, racism is in black people too, not to whites. There are reasons for that, so racism is everywhere, outside and inside. Yes, Sipo, it's sometimes dressed up as other things. Some called it names, xenophobia. Yes, Lechasa says it's just politically influenced.
Yeah, no, that's what he says. And I like the fact that Lechasa is also involved with this as well. Khawhela Mala comes in. The only people concerned about this race issue is us blacks. That's why you don't see whites at court in the Northwest condemning the killing.
Those are your new tweets that have been coming in with regards to this. Of course, we're counting down to the Constitutional Court, supposed to hear a very important matter this morning. But we've also been asking you the question, if it's Brian Malefe's first day, supposedly today, at Eskom, but he jumped the gun. They say he went at 4 o'clock this morning.
Oh, that early?
4 o'clock, he was in the office. He's already having meetings with new staff and the likes. Our question of the day is, what are people's views on this?
Now, the first one is Supom Tembu says, why are we stopping him in going to his job? Did he kill someone? No. There are killers out there who do as they please.
Well, I'd say there's a fair point. Numbers certainly say that, but there are processes that need to be adhered to. Alex tweets us.
Alex comes in with the Eskom board should be dissolved. That's out of those are the other ones. Molefe must go back to where he belongs.
Of course, I was just asked a short while ago, where does he belong on the back of that tweet? Sipo Mtembu tweets us, he says, as he did resign, not retire from his post, why did he just come and fill his post immediately by then? What took them so long? It's just executive searches that normally take up to a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't just replace an executive overnight. That's where we are now. Let's just take a look at what are our top stories right now. All eyes are on the Constitutional Court as parties in civil society march from early this morning there. They are about to hear arguments in the UDM's application to carry out a secret ballot in the motion of no confidence in President Jacob Zuma. The Democratic Alliance has given the MPA until today to decide whether or not to prosecute the president for his role in the Nkandla corruption scandal. Then we can report that Brian Molefe has returned to his Eskom office as the CEO this morning, this despite heavy criticism from political parties and unions. Well, that's our news headlines. Let's get the top sports stories from Cameron.
Yevon, thank you very much. Quite a lot happening in the world of sports. We had a wonderful weekend. Lots to celebrate on this Monday morning.
Great, I'm so happy for the Blitzbox. Just fantastic, aren't they?
You know what, Yevon, we're talking a little bit about exactly how the Blitzbox have gotten themselves into that next level where they're now the team to look forward to.
Absolutely, and I think they're the benchmark in South African sport right now with regards to culture and, let's call it, race relations. Within that team, they're the most transformed team in the country and they get along the best, and it sets a wonderful example, and we should all look at the Sevens team to see there's magic happening in that team.
100%. Could not have said it better myself. They are the world champions and they are currently the most transformed team we have that represents South Africa. Good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in the sports today. The Blitzbokke are a paragon of world dominance as they win gold in Paris and get crowned world champions with a tournament to spare.
The perfect weekend in Paris. Gold medal winners and now crowned the best sevens team in the world, South Africa.
Akasipana ngepena asipana na lituba wa7 unozikora kalaka sungula Karagata.
Thunder Royal Zulu, who will be playing in the PSL next season, win the NFT title with a record 62 points.
It's his 55th win in Formula One. Hamilton wins the Spanish Grand Prix and closes the championship gap to 6 points as Sebastian Vettel comes home in second.
Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton closes the gap at the top of the F1 driver standings after winning a thriller of a tactical showdown with title rival Sebastian Vettel of Ferrari in Spain. All this and more I've got for you later on the Sports Bulletin. Be sure to stay for it because Evan has got the news for you right now.
Yeah, it's our top story, and of course we're counting down to go there live shortly as soon as the Chief Justice gets matters underway. We'll be live in the Constitutional Court. Of course, if you've just joined us, opposition parties and civil movements, they've joined forces this morning and led a protest march to the Constitutional Court here in Johannesburg. They're calling on all South Africans to continue on and join the march. Meanwhile, the Constitutional Court, of course, will hear arguments any moment from now on whether a secret ballot should be conducted when parliamentarians vote on a motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma.
The UDM filed the application to the Constitutional Court. The party says it's confident that the highest court in the land will rule in its favor. President Jacob Zuma, however, maintains that the court has no jurisdiction to hear the application. He argues that the Constitution doesn't make provision for a secret vote against a sitting president. Opposition parties say because the President and Speaker of Parliament are voted into office by a secret ballot in Parliament, and that a vote to remove them should also be done in secret. On the other hand, the UDM argues that some ANC MPs have received death threats amid speculation that they might vote with the opposition parties to have the president removed.
Well, we're told that the Chief Justice has just taken his seat. Let's go over to the Constitutional Court.
First respondent, the Speaker of the National Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Moerane.
Chief Justice, Justices, I, together with Mr. Sikakani and Ms. Sello, appear for the second respondent.
Thank you, Mr. Semenya.
Chief Justice, Ms. Hobden and I appear for the fifth respondent, the economic freedom fighters.
Thank you, Mr. Nkaitobi.
Chief Justice, other justices of the Constitutional Court, I, together with Ms. Paraffin Jones, appear for the sixth respondent, that's the Inkatha Freedom Party.
Thank you, Mr. Katz.
Chief Justice, other justices, I appear. My name is Lizelle Adams, and I appear on behalf of the eighth respondent.
Thank you, Ms. Adams.
Chief Justice and members of the court, I appear for the first amicus curiae, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, with my learned friends Ms. Adhikari and Mr. Mbikiwa.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlender.
Chief Justice, other members of the court, I appear together with my junior, Mr. Bishop, for the second amicus curiae, the Unemployed People's Movement.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer.
May it please the court, I appear together with my learned friends, Ms. Talk and Ms. Ntloko, for the third amicus, the Institute for Security Studies.
Thank you, Mr. Maneche.
May it please the court, together with my learned friend Mr. Musandiwa and Ms. Finn, I appear for the fourth amicus, the Shosholoza Progressive Party.
Thank you too, Mr. Unterholter. Mr. Mpofu.
As the court pleases,
Just for the record, all the parties wish not to be interrupted for 10 minutes and the amicus for 5 minutes.
We're indebted to the court, Chief Justice.
Thank you.
Chief Justice, this is a very important matter for our democracy. It's an important matter for all our citizens who are represented by members of parliament, whether those citizens are members of political parties, whether they voted or did not vote, whether they are even not of voting age. But thankfully, important as it is, this is a matter in which the issues are narrow and crisp, in my respectful submission. The only question which arises, and I was using this example when I was talking to the members of my team, to say, let's look at this as a multiple choice examination question. And the question then, bearing in mind that this is a matter that implicates the interpretation of primarily section 102.2 of the Constitution, as well as, to some extent, section 104, or rather Rule 104 of the Rules of the National Assembly. The multiple choice question, I pose it as follows. In respect of the secret ballot as a method of voting, the meaning of the expression, a vote, just those 5 letters, a vote, in section 102, is that a secret ballot is impliedly A, required, B, permitted, or C, prohibited. That is all that this matter is about. The parties will be seeking to various extents to convince you that the answer is A or it's B, as the applicants will do, or that it is C, as the respondents will do. The stances of the parties in general is that 5 of the parties say it is A or B. In other words, it is either required or permitted. 2 of the amici, Shosholoza and ISS, say that it is B, but they are neutral as to whether it is also A. And 1, the UPM, says it is B, but not A. In other words, it's permitted, but it's not required. And of course, the respondents will seek to convince the court that it is excluded, prohibited, outlawed, whatever other synonym one can find. Now, the only problem we have is that it is not very clear, and I'm saying this with an eye to inviting my learned colleagues for the respondents. The ambit and scope of the defense or opposition is very difficult to work out. We tried to do an exercise on our side to work out who is opposing what. And it was quite a difficult exercise indeed. For example, the president says that he only opposes prayers 3 and 4. But at certain parts of the affidavit and the heads, and in fact, at the end of the affidavit, it is said that the whole application should be dismissed. Similarly, the speaker says that she has no problem with the secret ballot. And her only trouble is that she thinks that she does not have a discretion to order one. And so presumably once that problem is resolved, there would be no problem. But again, at various parts of the pleadings or the heads, it's widened to the extent that she says the entire application should be dismissed. And yet, there is a press statement which is in the papers that she issued and went so far as to say she doesn't know where this notion comes from that she's opposing this application. Because she just wants clarity on this and the other. And I'll make a reference to that at a later stage. But be that as it may, we work on the basis that the matter is opposed in different parts by somebody in the respondent camp. What is very clear is that both respondents raise what I call the preliminary matters, which is exclusive jurisdiction or direct access. Or I forgot to mention, Chief Justice and Justices, that the issue of agency is no longer going to be raised. I have cleared that with my learned colleague, Mr. Semenya. So the preliminary issues would be jurisdiction and direct access. When it comes to remedy, it would seem, and of course our learned colleagues will enlighten us when they get their opportunity, it would seem that the president's position is that it would be inappropriate for him to enter the terrain of the speaker, and therefore he does not express himself on the question of substitution or the review application. But when it comes to remedy, both parties raise the related question of separation of powers. That's the best we could do to work out who is opposing what, which relief. We are going to go mainly on what we call the primary argument, which is that the secret ballot is required or mandatory or compulsory, and we'll be using those synonyms interchangeably. And only in the alternative are we going to talk about whether it is permitted or allowed or discretionary or optional and so on. Now, in doing so, one of the approaches we're going to take is firstly to demonstrate that it cannot conceivably be prohibited. In other words, the only obstacle that the respondents can bring for our case to succeed would be to demonstrate that it is prohibited, and we will show that that is out of the question. Then the only question should be whether is it required or is it permitted. There will be an overlap in my argument, Chief Justice and Justices. When I deal with what I call the primary relief, I will concentrate on Section 102 itself, the interpretation, the preferred interpretation of Section 102 to support that argument. But those arguments will be of equal applicability to the alternative. So I will not repeat them when I deal with the alternative. And what I will then do with the leave of the court is when I do the alternative submission, then the main thrust will be the interpretation of Rule 104, bearing in mind that the constitutional submissions will be subsumed therein. But while I still have uninterrupted time, I want to say this. Contrary to all the commentators out there about what this matter is about, this matter is only about one thing and one thing only: the interpretation, what interpretation is to be given to the legal instruments in question. In other words, the section 102 and the rule. And that is the most mundane and boring and everyday function of the court. When the parties have a dispute, whether it's about a section, whether it's about a contract, whether it's about property, that dispute gets brought to a court because that is the only place where such a dispute can be finally resolved. And so I'm making this point for this reason. This case is not about the separation of powers, nor is it about the so-called encroachment of the court into anything, nor is it about the court likely to introduce anything. If our interpretation of Section 102 is correct, then that interpretation was always like that since 1996 when the Constitution came into being. Nobody's introducing. The court will simply be interpreting what is. And if we succeed on the basis that the secret ballot is required, compulsory, mandatory, and so on, then with the greatest respect, the issue of separation of powers does not come into it whatsoever. Because there the court will simply be saying, yes, Section 102 should be interpreted to say that it is compulsory. End of the story. If it is compulsory, then it's compulsory tomorrow, next week, next year, in 20 years' time, and so on. And that's the end of it. Only if the court, on the other hand, finds in our favor in respect of the second leg, in other words, that it is discretionary. And even then, when it comes to the question of remedy and the question of substitution in particular, clearly then issues of separation of powers become relevant in that narrow sense, because by definition, substitution means basically making the decision, for the court making the decision.
The 10 minutes is up.
Oh, well, Chief Justice, if you can permit me then to make the final point, which is this, that we will, in a nutshell, we will also ask for a special order against the president to pay costs personally and from his own pocket. And that I will address later. But in a nutshell, it is the complaint we raise is that the president was cited as a president of the country, and the ANC was cited as a party. The ANC chose not to get involved in this matter. But the president, using the state attorney or taxpayers' money, has sought to make submissions on behalf of the ANC, which is his private life or interest, so to speak. But we'll deal with that later. But finally, by way of introduction, I want to deal with what I'll call the atmospheric issues.
Are you still pleading for protection there, or may we?
Half a minute.
You see, I offered you people 15 minutes. You said 10 minutes is enough.
Half a minute, Chief Justice. And it is simply to say this. If the Speaker is to be believed that she has no problem with the secret ballot for a minute, and that she seeks, and one has sympathy with that argument, because insofar as she says, look, there's a Klawama judgment, and maybe I think I'm constrained by it, rightly or wrongly, then one can understand that. She needs clarification. If that is so, then really what do we have here? We have the following situation. The only person in this country who is opposing the application that the motion of no confidence in the president of the country should be conducted by secret ballot is the president of the country. I will say something more about that later.
Mr. Mbofu, I'm sorry. Shouldn't you start with what you described as preliminary issues? Why should we entertain this matter? What is the basis for us to hear it?
Yes. Thank you, Justice Chafter. We should. Well, the main thrust of these preliminary issues is the question of exclusive jurisdiction. Our submission is simply this. The entire source of I'm going to say that there are what I call sub-obligations and powers and so on, but the source of all this is the obligation on Parliament to hold the executive accountable. That obligation is by definition exclusive to Parliament, to state the obvious. But to travel from that obligation to the obligations that are pleaded here, we then say the following. In the discharge of that obligation, broadly speaking, in fact, let me put it like this, that obligation starts the minute that members of Parliament are sworn in. That obligation arises until the next election. And in the continuum of that obligation is the question of the motion of no confidence. It can manifest itself in various other ways, which I don't need to go into now. And the motion of no confidence itself is, if you like, with respect, can be viewed as an obligation, except that it's now almost an obligation on the president. The section says, to paraphrase, if a motion is passed, the president must resign. It could also have been worded the other way. The president must resign when a motion is passed. So it's an obligation on his part to do something.
Mr. Mpofu, I'm sorry, and it may well be that my brother still wants to put further questions to you. Just locate the obligation for us. In the clearest of terms, what is the obligation that rests on Parliament on which reliance is placed for this application? Just locate it for us.
Well, that obligation is to vote in a motion of no confidence. In other words, once a motion of no confidence has been placed, there are three obligations that arise. One is on the Speaker to schedule such a motion, and then the obligation on the members, Parliament, broadly speaking, the National Assembly, let's put it that way, to vote. And also an obligation on the National Assembly to debate the motion. Those are the threefold obligations. But narrowly...
No, you were going there. I just wanted a section and a subsection so that we know whatever argument flows from here hinges on this section of the Constitution.
Those obligations, Chief Justice, correct, arise from 102.2 itself, and also the ancillary obligations on the Speaker, which is really why we're here, arise also from the rules. So in other words, the Speaker has a duty, at the very least, to schedule, to allow for the debate or arrange for the debate, and also to arrange for the vote. And we locate the obligation here that in her obligation to arrange for the vote, she has also an obligation to when asked, as she is asked now, to choose the method of voting, to do so. She has abdicated, to put it bluntly, that the discharge of that obligation, and that is why we're here.
But the Speaker is not Parliament, is she?
Well, she is and she isn't. As she has accepted that she has been cited as the representative of Parliament. So she's the embodiment of Parliament. When somebody is litigating against Parliament, we cite the Speaker in that fashion.
Doesn't the Constitution define what Parliament is, Mr. Mpofu?
Yeah, no, of course, the Constitution does, but what I'm saying, Justice Shafter, is that the Speaker must be seen in her multiple roles. She says herself in her answering affidavit, I'm cited here as the Speaker, I'm also cited as a representative of the National Assembly per se.
But should we go by that? Shouldn't we go by what the Constitution says, tells us what Parliament is, when we are searching for determining whether Parliament has failed to fulfill one of its obligations?
Yeah, yes, of course, it is like that, Justice Shafter, but just as when we say the Department of Home Affairs has failed to do something, that Department of Home Affairs is just an inanimate thing. The person who has really failed is either the DG or the minister, depending on the matter. But you can't say the Department of Home Affairs. There's no such thing as the Department of Home Affairs. It's just a fiction. So the real department is represented by an official who is designated constitutionally to represent that institution. And that's all we're saying. We're saying the Speaker then comes in two guises, as the Speaker, but also as the representative, the constitutional representative of Parliament.
But Section 167, which carves out the exclusive jurisdiction of this court, make reference to Parliament.
Yeah.
And the Constitution tells us what Parliament is. Why should we include the Speaker in the description of Parliament?
Yes. Well, Justice Shafter, I can't take it further than to say, yes, the Constitution says Parliament, but Parliament is not a person. That section 167 also says the President. There it's easy. We know the President is a person. But when that same section, 167(4)(e), says Parliament, it obviously is not referring to a human being. It's referring to an institution. And that institution, constitutionally speaking, is embodied, represented by the Speaker. So otherwise, Parliament could never do anything. If you are never going to be able to pinpoint that it was either the Secretary of Parliament or this one or that one who did whatever they had to do, then you will never be able to come to this court on the basis that Parliament has done anything, because Parliament is just a fiction of law. So
let me just make sure I understand you.
Yeah.
And let me know if what I put to you is not what you're saying. Am I to understand you to be saying that the point that demonstrates the obligation that, according to you, rests on the Speaker and by extension Parliament, that has not been, that she has failed to fulfill is the following. Section 167(4)(e) reads, only the Constitutional Court may decide that Parliament or the President has failed to fulfill a constitutional obligation. And as I understand you, and that's why I want help from you,
Yes.
you seem to be saying the obligation that rests on the Speaker is to ensure, as identified by the National Assembly, to ensure that when a request for a motion of no confidence is asked for, that happens the way it is required by the Constitution to happen.
Yeah.
And according to your submission, the way the Constitution requires that a motion of no confidence in the President be handled is by secret ballot.
That's correct.
So if the Speaker is asked to have a motion of no confidence scheduled in a way that will allow members of the National Assembly to vote by secret ballot, if she does not do that, according to your submission, she has failed to fulfill the obligation to have the motion of no confidence
That's
conducted. Is that what you are saying?
That is my submission, Chief Justice. And that submission rests solely on the fact that Section 102 says the National Assembly must do these things, must vote, must do this, but the rules are very clear who should organize, so to speak, all that. And our case is very simple, that the Speaker, on the primary relief, the Speaker has an obligation to arrange for a secret ballot. That's our primary relief. Whether we're right or wrong for the purposes of jurisdiction is another matter. For the purposes of jurisdiction, it is about what are we pleading. We are pleading that the Speaker has such an obligation to arrange the secret ballot. And she has failed to discharge it. That is all. We might be found when we get to the merits to be wrong on that, but for the purposes of jurisdiction, we must be judged by what it is that we've brought to this court, which is simply that she has failed to discharge that obligation. That obligation arises, yes, it is ancillary, that I concede, but it arises from the obligations that spring out of Section 102.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mpofu.
Sorry.
Just for clarification, going back to the question that was asked by my brother, Justice Jafta, just now,
Yeah.
with regard to Parliament. Now, as I understand the Constitution, Parliament consists of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. Now, does the Constitution or the law permit the Speaker of the National Assembly alone to represent the entire Parliament, or you would have had to cite the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces as well?
Well, two answers, Justice Sondo. One is that, once again, if the business about which we are here, let's say Parliament had 3 or 4 chambers, but if the business about which we are concerns one of the chambers, which is represented constitutionally, as I've explained, by a specific person, then that person, with respect, would be sufficient to cite to represent the institution, number one. Number two, that point, well, is not a point that has been raised, and for good reason. Because in all these litigation, whether it's Klawama and all the other cases that have come before this court, the person who gets traditionally cited is the Speaker, on the understanding that I've just articulated, whether it was the EFF Nkandla case, whether it is this one, and all the cases where Parliament is implicated. And the reason for that is also to be found in Section 23(2)A of the Powers and Privileges Act, which simply says, 23(2)(a), for the purposes of subsection 1, where appropriate, that's a reference to the State Liability Act and so on, of a minister, department must, where the proceedings are against where the proceedings are against Parliament or a House, coming to what you raised, Justice Jafta, be construed as a reference to the Speaker or the Chairperson, or both the Speaker and the Chairperson, as the case may be. In other words, a litigant, there would have been nothing wrong if we had followed the route that Justice Zondo suggests. We could have cited both, could have cited the one, or we could have cited the other. And we have cited the other.
Well, I'm sorry, you might have to repeat the provision you have just read.
Yes, it's section 23(2)(a).
Okay, I got the impression from what you read that what is meant is that if you seek to cite somebody in respect of the National Assembly, then you would cite the Speaker.
Correct.
If you seek to cite somebody in respect of the National Council of Provinces, then you would cite the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. If you seek to cite somebody for Parliament, I don't know if it goes that far, I'm just thinking now, maybe you might need to cite both. Maybe you might just read it again.
Yes, no, with respect, it says Parliament or a House shall be construed as a reference to the Speaker or the Chairperson, or to both the Speaker and the Chairperson, as the case may be. But in any case, section 42(3), when I started, I said all these obligations can be traced back to section 42, or rather to the 42(3), yes. 42(3) that we're about here says the following: the National Assembly is elected to represent the people and to ensure government by the people under the Constitution. It does this by choosing the president and so on and so on. So the obligations that we're about here today lie on the National Assembly. Hence, if you read that section of the Constitution together with 23(2)(a), then the person to be cited would clearly be the Speaker.
I'm not too sure I understand your answer, Mr. Mpofu. I thought your, at least in my own mind and clarified, it seems to be different from your own understanding. I thought, to the extent that section 167(4)(e) refers to Parliament, and section 102 refers to the National Assembly, and the National Assembly is not Parliament, it's a segment of Parliament, one of the two houses of Parliament. Your reliance on the Speaker would stem from the same basis as in the EFF case that we decided, namely, requiring of the National Assembly to hold the President accountable in terms of Section 55 of the Constitution. Let me put it differently, I'm sorry. 167(4)(e) refers to Parliament, but 55 refers to the National Assembly. And yet, for the purpose of determining whether this court had an exclusive jurisdiction, knowing that section 167(4)(e) refers to Parliament and not the National Assembly, whereas 55 confines itself to the National Assembly, we were still able to decide that a reference to Parliament in 167(4)(e) should be understood to permit of a situation where the National Assembly is singled out to do something, as in Section 55 of the Constitution. I don't know if I'm making
That's
sense
exactly,
to you. So a reference in 102 to the National Assembly is the same as a reference to the National Assembly in 55.
That is correct.
You can't use, is it State Liability Act? You can't use that to interpret the Constitution. You've got to use the Constitution and existing jurisprudence to interpret the Constitution.
Of course, Chief Justice, that is not what I was doing. What I was saying is, let's say, for example, there was a rule of court that says you will only cite the Speaker. I would cite that rule, but I wouldn't be using that rule to interpret the Constitution. And what the Chief Justice has articulated is exactly what I'm saying. The 102 is our starting point, and the obligation, power, whatever you call it in 102, is on the National Assembly per se. And everything else then flows from that. Section 55, as the CJ correctly points out, and also Section 42, which I've just read out, all refer to the obligations of the National Assembly. And on the same basis in the EFF case and in all the other cases. So
I was only saying there is a case that says, effectively, in circumstances where the National Assembly is said to have failed to fulfill its constitutional obligations, we already have authority that says, if you want to check whether Section 165(4)(e) kicks in, and it's only the National Assembly that is referred to in that section, then there is authority.
That's correct.
Yes.
Mr. Mbofu, I'm sorry. I think my inquiry was a different one. I started by bringing your attention to the provision of the Constitution that defines Parliament. And that provision is Section 42. And it tells us that Parliament consists of the National Assembly and the House of National Provinces. Now, the issue is whether, in the context of Section 167, for purposes of exclusive jurisdiction of this court, whether we should read National Assembly as meaning the Speaker. I thought the Speaker is one of the members of the National Assembly. So if we can read National Assembly to mean the Speaker, if at some point she takes a decision, that decision should be attributed to the whole National Assembly, then I would understand the argument.
Yes, well, it is the argument, Justice Chafta. When Mr. Ngamayo Mzinkwankwa wrote on behalf of the UDM to the Speaker asking for a motion of no confidence, he was not writing to Ms. Baleka Mbete. He was writing to the National Assembly, which is tasked in terms of Section 102 to do something. But he couldn't just write a letter and address it to the National Assembly. He had to address that letter to the person who, in terms of the section, the State Liability Act, the Powers and Privileges Act, is by law the embodiment of that institution and is the person to be cited when that institution is being taken to task. We are saying, I agree exactly with that formulation. So it's the Speaker, both in the failure to carry out the obligation and in her being cited there, is the embodiment of the National Assembly. As court pleases.
Mr. Mpofu, as you know, it's either exclusive jurisdiction or direct access. If you could also address us on that point.
Yes.
And in particular, the allegation that the applicant should have exhausted internal remedies and how you say I can't pronounce it,
Tlowama.
is distinguishable because there's also the allegation that applicant should have appealed that judgment and he did not do so.
Well, very briefly, Justice Mhlanhla, what we're saying there is that, and again, I won't repeat the test, in the broad context of the interests of justice, we are saying, and given the fact that this is a matter that is inherently urgent, we're saying, assuming then that we had taken the matter against the Speaker, then we would have had to go to the Western Cape High Court. And one of the issues that relate to Tlowama, which we would like the court to consider in the broad consideration of the interests of justice, is this. Putting aside the fact that we are saying Tlowama is distinguishable, because remember, we're saying Tlowama is distinguishable, but we're also saying it was wrongly decided. So we're saying two things about Tlowama. But if we had gone on an urgent basis to the Western Cape High Court, bearing in mind that Tlowama was a full bench decision, then that court would have been bound by Tlowama. So that's the one thing we say about Tlowama to be considered. And therefore, it might have been a futile exercise to do that. But secondly, what we say is that Tlowama also, maybe fortuitously, resolves another impediment which is always on the way towards direct access, namely that this court is reluctant to be the court of first instance on an issue. Tlowama, therefore, then provides a situation where the question was decided wrongly, in brackets, but nevertheless was considered and decided in a lower court. So Tlowama serves those two purposes. One, the futility approach that I've spoken about, and secondly, it fortuitously takes away the impediment of this court in reality being the court of first instance.
Please go back to my sister's question in case you haven't completed your answer. But could the Speaker do anything when Tlowama is there?
Well,
without disregarding a court decision?
Yes, she could. That is why in my 10 minutes, I specifically said, we have great sympathy with the position of the Speaker. Because the Speaker is not a lawyer. She's not going to pick up the judgment and say it's distinguishable and all those things that we say as lawyers. So we understand. But remember, for example, when we deal with the rationality of her decision, the test is objective. So it doesn't matter if subjectively she thought Tlowama binds her. It doesn't matter. If Tlowama, in actual fact, is wrongly decided or distinguishable, as we say, particularly if it's distinguishable, the IFP, I'm sure, will raise that point. The IFP raises the point that Tlowama actually is distinguishable on the grounds that it was a case decided on another set of rules, not these rules. That is a criticism that we have. But we say, assume that was not there, it is also wrongly decided. So whether it is because...
I'm sorry to interrupt. You know we interrupt, Mr. Mbofu.
No, of course.
No, I'm not even there. I'm saying, here is the Speaker told that, this section 102, subsection 2, demands of you, requires of you, to arrange that voting on a motion of no confidence against the President be by secret ballot. And she's confronted by Tlowama judgment, which says, but there is no way in which this motion can be conducted by a secret ballot. How does she disregard a court judgment like that? Even if she thought it was wrong, it's there.
Well, Chief Justice, with the greatest respect, then we must go back to where this matter comes from. This matter comes from the letter of demand that was written on behalf of the UDM.
Mr. Mbofu. Sorry, Mr. Mbofu. Mr. Mbofu.
I'm listening. Yes,
yes.
Just
the question by the Chief Justice assists you. Mr. Mpofu, I'm trying to point out that what the Chief Justice is pointing out is that the Speaker could not have taken any other decision in view of Tloama.
Yeah.
And therefore, it supports your submission that you are entitled to come here and ask for direct access.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, but that's a, why else am I saying this? The only reason I'm saying this, Justice Chafta, is exactly to agree with the Chief Justice. I am saying this is why I said it in my introduction. We have sympathy with the Speaker, but that sympathy ends at the point at which she was bound in her mind by Tloama. The only other place we could go to is here. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Well, thank you. So that's the end of the preliminary issues. Now, oh yes.
You are left with 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Yeah.
Mr. Mpofu,
yes,
perhaps you should just go straight and tell us why you say the vote is required or permitted to be by secret ballot.
Thank you. Well, we say this based. Firstly, we say that the vote is prescribed to be by secret ballot because it is common cause that a secret ballot is what we call a constitutionally permissible method of voting. And I'm saying that as a precursor to something else. Why do we say it's constitutionally permissible? When we invoke Section 86 and the procedure in Schedule 3, we invoke it for two reasons. The first reason is to make this point that this is a constitutionally permissible method. And it immediately does away with one of the defenses that are raised, namely that we want to introduce some secret society, or that the values of openness and transparency and so on will be undermined. We say that that cannot be so. If that was so, if a secret ballot was such an animal, then the Constitution would not prescribe it under any circumstances. In other words, the value judgment, the hierarchy of values, so to speak, if you take it to Section 1D, which talks about all these things. It talks about accountability, it talks about democracy, it talks about transparency, it talks about openness. We say in this context, the hierarchy of those values is already determined by the Constitution. Because the Constitution has said, yes, there will be so-called encroachment into openness. But because of the bigger values of protecting the voter, then we will allow a secret ballot. It's the same in Section 19. Section 19, of course, it would be nice if all the citizens would vote in the open and raise their hands. That would be great for openness. But the Constitution, the drafters of the Constitution in their wisdom have made the choice of values to say, no, we know that would be great for openness, but we're going to prescribe that the vote must come by way of a secret ballot. And that argument, it goes right to the international stage. The United Nations Declaration for Human Rights, no less, knowing all the importance of openness, says that the vote internationally must be secured by way of secret ballot. So it is that submission. But the second reason why we invoke Section 86.3, Section 86 together read with Part A, is what we call what I call the Masetla congruence. In other words, we're saying, we use a rhetorical question, maybe is the best way to approach it. Why is it that the Constitution prescribes a secret ballot in Section 86? The answer must be simple. It is to protect the voter. Against what? Against possible intimidation, not necessarily all intimidation, but the risk of intimidation, the risk of any threats, the risk of any adverse consequences. When we say the citizens must vote by secret, we're not saying that in every voting station in this country there's somebody standing there to intimidate somebody. That would be ridiculous. What we're saying is the mere risk or potential or likelihood of such a thing happening constitutionally compels us to prescribe the secret ballot.
Mr. Mpofu, isn't there another reason why the Constitution mandates a secret ballot when more than one nominee is nominated for the office of President? Isn't it because the execution of the office of President is deeply connected to the personal attributes of the person who's up for election? And that therefore at that level it's not simply a nominee from a party, and that MPs are required to vote for the person of that individual who will become president in their individual capacities.
Yes, no, that is definitely so, Justice Cameron. But our short answer to that is that just as those considerations are important when we choose the president, the same considerations must be important when we unchoose the president. In other words,
I'm glad you're better able to discern the questions that are designed to assist you, Mr. Mpofu.
Yes, thank you. That's good, please. And welcome them with both hands, as God pleases. So that then is the ground for 86.3. Or for invoking 86. But there's a more maybe dramatic reason. And it is this. The Speaker, I call it the crime prevention rationale. In its wisdom, the Parliament has declared intimidation of members of Parliament a crime. That is Section 7 and 8 read with Section 27 of the Powers and Privileges Act. So then surely that must put an obligation on the Speaker simply to do what she can do to prevent that crime from being committed. And that cuts both for the primary and the secondary relief. Because in this particular case, it so happens that the crime, quote unquote, has been reported in the letter of demand. But in the notional situation, the crime is a potential that is always with us. Just as fraud, bribery, corruption of voters, and so on. Those ever-present risks must be ameliorated. And the shortcut answer is that of the available methods, the only method that can prevent that crime from either being committed in real life, in this particular case, or as a risk that is always there, is the secret ballot.
Which crime has been reported?
The intimidation.
Which one?
Section?
No. I know the section. I thought you said a crime has already been reported.
Yes.
So I was wondering which crime has been reported.
Yes.
Now.
I will assist you, Chief Justice. The letter of demand says, I'll paraphrase. Letter of demand says, Dear Speaker, there's a motion of no confidence. It has come to our attention that there is intimidation that is taking place. In any event, and then it quotes the sections that we have already dealt with. Therefore, please arrange for a secret ballot. So that is bringing to the attention of the Speaker in this balance, the crime specifically. But what I'm saying, Chief Justice, is that even if that was not the case, the ever-present danger of intimidation is what propels Section 19.3 to make all of us to vote by secret ballot.
Shouldn't we go there? Because it toxifies the engagement. If we're going to have to, as a court, take into account that some crime has been reported, it raises all sorts of, by who? Is it a crime? Also, shouldn't we just look at the law and interpret it?
Yeah,
crime or no crime, suspected or real, just look at the law and say, what is the meaning of Section 102.2? Why is Section 86 couched in this manner, read with the schedule? What undergirds the approach in Schedule 3, Part A, Item 6A? Why do we have it like that? Yeah. Why is it necessary when the president is elected to do it by secret ballot?
Yes.
What are the concerns there? Do they or do they not extend to the removal? Which one is potentially more perilous than the other, if there is any peril?
Yes.
Is it when you entertain the hope to be elected, or when you face the risk of being denied of what you already enjoy? Shouldn't we be engaging at that level? Because now if you're going to say, yes, there's an offense, there's some criminal activity, it just makes it all the more difficult for the judges to do justice to the issues.
I think there's a misunderstanding.
Yes.
I was doing exactly what the Chief Justice is saying. It's called the mischief approach. I am saying, why? That's why I said I'm asking the rhetorical question, which is exactly what the Chief Justice, with respect, is saying. What was the mischief that propelled Parliament to, or the Constitution rather, to prescribe in Section 86 the secret ballot? That's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying that mischief includes actual or perceived or potential risk of intimidation or fraud. That is all. And that potential, with the greatest respect, I agree with the Chief Justice, that potential risk, whether it happens to be actual or not in this case, I agree should be put aside. But that ever-present potential, in my respectful submission, is present, is more present now. Or let me put it in a different way. Its realization, or even its mere presence, is a threat to the effectiveness of the Section 102, the operation of Section 102. And many adjectives have been used here to say that it would then be illusory, negatory, warped, is the expression that Justice Madlanga used in the DA case, meaningless, blunt, all sorts of things. But that's the essence. The essence is that that right would be denuded of its essence, of its purpose, coming to the question of purposive interpretation, and might as well not happen. In fact, we might as well not have the Section 102 if it can be so denuded of its character and impact and teeth. Toothless was the other adjective that was used. So it would be rendered all those things. And surely then, if we have all those ailments, and we are saying, here is the antidote. To all those ailments, there is only one antidote. That antidote is the secret ballot. Immediately, the teeth are back, all the strength is back, the section 102 is given its power back. That is the crux of the.
If I may, just for the benefit of other council that will debate, that will make submissions later. Here are my concerns, and I would be helped speaking for myself if this were to be addressed. One, why does Section 19(2) of the Constitution require a vote by secret ballot? Why does Section 86, read with Schedule 3, Part A, Item 6A, require a secret ballot in relation to the President? What is the logicality of discounting a secret ballot when it comes to a motion of no confidence? And I confine it to a motion of no confidence because that's where we are. Why do we believe that considerations that explain the need for a secret ballot in relation to Section 19(2) and the schedule do not extend to a motion of no confidence? Is it because it's not written? What are we to make of the Botswana judgment that you refer to? What are we to make of the Zimbabwe Supreme Court judgment that you referred to and other of your colleagues also referred to in their heads of argument? Just a simple explanation that everybody can relate to. I think we'll contaminate, for want of a better expression, and I say it with all the respect, nobody should feel offended. We stand the risk of being diverted, our attention being diverted elsewhere. If we bring in, yes, so on whom was an assassination attempt, for what reason, and so says so was intimidated. I'm not too sure we should even reflect on those things, because the law is there.
Yes.
Regardless of what is said to have happened. How is this law properly interpreted, or this constitutional provision properly interpreted to be applied in a situation like this, regardless of who is the incumbent and whether we like or hate the person? That's irrelevant.
Completely.
So I think, speaking for myself, if I were to be addressed on those issues, I would find a lot of help.
Yes. Chief Justice, that is the point. If I didn't make the point in my 10 minutes, well, I'm making it now. The issues of intimidation, this one phoned, this one, do not enter into our primary...
SMS and all those things.
It doesn't enter into the primary obligation at all. Just as I said, all these other issues about separation of powers and so on, the question is very simple. If we apply a constitutional interpretation of Section 102, a holistic, schematic, systematic interpretation as we are prescribed to do, and this is a challenge I'm putting to my learned colleagues, they must then tell us in that context, what is wrong with the secret ballot? Why must it be excluded? Because their case can only be that it is excluded. Why would it be excluded? We're busy giving you reasons, and many parties will, as to why it must be there. But nobody has told us what is wrong with it. And all the things that have been put up, party discipline and so on, do not answer the question, which is that a method that is constitutionally permissible for all the reasons, whether in Section 19 and all the other sections, Section 111 and so on, is now said to be, because of the vitality and all the things we know from Mazibuko of this particular, and the risk, and I put it no higher than that, the risk of the outcome being contaminated, whether that risk is going to materialize in this or the next or in 100 years' time, it doesn't matter. But the mere risk of the outcome not reflecting The real thing that all the South Africans want to know, Chief Justice, with respect, is very simple. Does the president continue to enjoy the confidence of the majority of the members of parliament? That's all. Now, if he does, well, then he does. But to answer that question, just as we do in the elections, the question is simple. Which political party enjoys the majority support of South Africans? And we bring the secret ballot to make sure that the answer that we get must have integrity. It must be the real answer. It must be untainted by any extraneous factor, whether that factor is fraud or fear or whatever. And that is all. It's a very simple antidote, as I call it, that we are waving respectfully to this court to say, here is the antidote for all these ills, real, potential, whether they've happened or are still going to happen, or whether they're not going to happen right now in this particular. And therefore, that brings
Mr. Mpofu,
Justice Matlanga.
It's quite plain from sections 19 and 102 read with the relevant schedule that the framers of the Constitution were quite alive to the need for a secret ballot. Can't an argument be made then that they must have consciously decided not to prescribe it when it came to a vote of no confidence?
Yes.
Can't it be said that, well aware of the need for it in the instances where it has been specified, that perhaps they chose openness, transparency, and so on, which in your submissions you did say is also a relevant or may well be a relevant consideration? Can they be said to have made a conscious choice and said, when it comes to a vote of no confidence, we are opting that there be no secret ballot?
Mr. Mpofu, before you respond, may I latch on what my brother has just stated? My own concern is, what should we make of the fact that the Constitution in some places expressly requires a vote by secret ballot, as in Section 19 and Section 86, but does not do so in Section 102, subsection 2. It's just to latch on what Justice Matlanga has just put to you.
And please, I'm aware of the authorities that criticize the use of the expressio unius exclusio alterius principle. So I'm not there at all. I'm at an interpretative level.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, Justice Matlanga, it's just the Latin. It's just the Latin. But the sentiment that both Justice Matlanga and Justice Khambembe are expressing is embodied in that maxim, quote unquote. And it makes sense that if in a statute the law says this and this will happen and then doesn't say it in another section, then the presumption would be that it was meant to exclude it. But it has been authoritatively said that that type of reasoning is not appropriate with respect to what the Canadian case called charter interpretation.
May I interrupt you, Mr. Mpofu? What my sister and my brother are saying is this. Could it be that the drafters of the Constitution, mindful of the principle of separation of powers, wanted this arm of the state to bear the responsibility to decide how they would want a motion of no confidence to be conducted?
Yes.
Because they knew they are the ones who included secret ballot elsewhere. Could it be that they left it to the National Assembly? Whenever you people think that it must be by secret ballot, it's up to you. Whenever you think that it should be by open ballot, it's all up to you.
The first answer is it could. I'm going to show why it isn't so. It could. And if it could, if even that formulation, Chief Justice, would be sufficient for us to succeed on the alternative ground. In other words, as the Chief Justice says, the law would then be saying, we are neither prescribing nor prohibiting the secret ballot. But then what are we doing? Then what are we doing is what is in prayer 3.2. We are then saying, it's up to you. If and when you think it should be done, it will be done. But that is a far cry from what is being contended by the respondents, namely that it's excluded. But let me now address the second question, which is why it is not by the use of that, or rather why it is prescribed nevertheless. The reason, with the greatest respect, and that is debated in the Botswana case, in both the lower court and the higher court. The reason the expressio unius kind of reasoning is not prescribed or says ill-suited for constitutional interpretation is exactly because it is best suited for statutory interpretation. Whereas in constitutional interpretation, what we are compelled to do is to look at the scheme of the Constitution. Now, if you're going to look at the scheme of the Constitution, you will never get anywhere by saying, well, if in this particular provision it's not there, therefore it means it is excluded. Because as Mr. Unterhalter will explain later, one has to look at the entire Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. One has to consider that, after all, these members of Parliament are also citizens of South Africa. They have the right, in terms of Section 15 of the Constitution, the right to freedom of conscience. They have the right, in terms of Section 16, to freedom of expression. If you want to go to the intimidation route, well, they have a right to life, they have a right to personal integrity, and so on and so on. So, a schematic, you will never get anywhere by using the expressio logic in interpreting a constitutional provision, because by definition, it is unsuited for that. So we cannot say the drafters. In fact, constitutions, by definition, this thing called a constitution, whether it's a constitution of a country or of a football club, is a framework. It's a framework. It will never foresee all possible situations. Life gets breathed into it by situational happenings.
I'm sorry, Mr. For motion of no confidence is there.
Yes.
You know it is there. You're prescribing for how to vote a president into office, but you're not telling us how to vote him or her out of office, you see. I'm just making the statement in passing that one is not some development that might arise in the future. It stares you in the face as you craft the Constitution.
Yes, well that is so, but so does it, all the Masetla logic, so to speak, is exactly based on that. Whenever the instrument being examined, such as was being examined in Masetla, is silent, that instrument was silent on how the DG of Intelligence should be fired. And that did not mean that the drafters of that act thought that he should never be fired. It was silent. And therefore, the court then says, okay, well, where does this power, what is the closest other power, the ancillary power? It is the power to hire. And the court then says, well, in that particular case, he who hires, fires. Now we're saying, as the court, please, in that case, it was a he. President Mbeki. Yeah.
Just on the point you are dealing with,
yes,
I have reservations whether you are correct to invoke the unius rule of presumption to deal with the question that has been raised, questions that have been raised by my colleagues, Justice Jafta and Justice Kampebe. Because My understanding is that when one seeks to interpret a constitution, one of the things that you have got to bear in mind is that the drafters of the constitution may have made certain choices, which, for example, the judiciary must respect. For good or bad reasons, to bring about a constitution, a complete constitution, there are certain issues that they had to deal with, and in regard to those issues, there may have been different views from different stakeholders, different political parties, and they make certain choices.
Yes.
And the judiciary should not, if possible, interfere with those choices. Now, as I understand the question that was put to you by my two colleagues, it is that when you look at the Constitution, you see that in certain sections and in respect of certain office bearers or functionaries, the Constitution is clear. It prescribes a secret ballot. It doesn't give a discretion. It prescribes a secret ballot. So that means, that seems to suggest that for those situations, the drafters did not want to leave it to somebody to decide whether this time it should be a secret ballot, this time it should not. And then they say, in a number of sections, then the Constitution doesn't prescribe a secret ballot.
Yes.
Are we therefore not dealing with a situation where the secret ballot is not prescribed? That was not as a result of oversight. That was deliberate. For whatever reasons that we may or may not think about. Yes. And therefore that to a very large extent, we must try and give effect to those choices that have been made.
Yes, I understand the question, Justice Zondo. But my answer is this. Firstly, as I said to the Chief Justice, even if that were so, that would not operate to exclude the secret ballot. So we would still have to succeed on the alternative. But let's put that aside. As far as the primary prayer is concerned, the answer is this. Yes, of course, Justice Zondo, it's possible. Anything is possible. But my job is to convince this court that that choice was not made, that choice would be illogical in the totality of the circumstances, that choice might even be oppressive, that choice might take away the teeth from the intended effect of Section 102. And therefore, and even more, if that choice was going to be situational, and this time it's secret ballot, next time it's open ballot, tomorrow it's by standing up or sitting down, that would create chaos because, as pointed out by one of the amici, then it would mean that every time there's a motion of no confidence, we must come back here. Somebody this time will say, I'm applying that it must be open. In 2 years' time, I'm applying that it must be secret. So that could not have been the intention of the drafters of the Constitution. And that is what I have to do.
But Mr. Mpofu, am I right? Mr. Mpofu, I'm sorry. Am I right to think that in order to uphold your primary contention, this court would have to say there was no choice made, but it was oversight?
Yes, and it would also have to say the following, Justice Zondo. again...
Before you continue, I must just complete.
Yes.
If you say, this court would have to say, it's oversight, which you have said we would need to say, but you want to add. If you say this court would have to say it was oversight that in some cases they didn't say prescribed secret ballot, part of my difficulty would be, it seems to be quite a number of places. Could one really be able to say, in all these other cases, it was oversight?
No, absolutely not. One would not be able to say that. But one would be able to say it when the subject matter is so identical, congruent, a mirror image of those situations where it is prescribed, that it would be absurd to say that it is not.
In other words, may I interrupt your answer?
Yes.
Does it help us at all to go back to the death penalty debate? Because there it was an express, we don't have any suggestion from the parties that in the preparatory work, travaux preparatoires, there was any debate about this. There's a silence in the Constitutional Assembly history so far as we've been told by all the parties. But in the death penalty debate, there was a lot of debate, and the parties differed. And they agreed to leave it out of the Constitution, which doesn't mean that the Constitution doesn't have a meaning. So does it help us in any way to determine the meaning of 1022?
Yes, that is correct, Justice Cameron. In other words, really, my broad submission is this: an omission is not an exclusion. Simple. And the second stage to that is that, because that is the mistake that the respondents make, that an omission ipso facto is an exclusion.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If the omission is not necessarily an exclusion, and the choice is not clear from the wording of the Constitution, how do we then determine it? Is the real question then not to ask how best is the purpose of a National Assembly oversight over the executive served by either a secret ballot or not?
Yes, absolutely, Justice Fromneman. The purposive approach helps us. But with respect, what I'm saying is that it would not also be true to say the choice is not clear, because the drafters of the Constitution, in what I would submit are almost identical situations where the dilemmas are the same, where the vexing questions are the same, the dangers are the same, and so on, has prescribed an antidote. All I'm here saying humbly is that that antidote, which is prescribed for those situations which are similar, identical, I don't know, on the continuum of the mirror image, that antidote must have been, that's my argument can only be, must have been contemplated. If it was not, then it was either an oversight or, as in the death penalty situation, it was a question deliberately left for this court to decide. Because Justice Cameron is right. Nobody in their right mind can think that it didn't occur to the drafters of the Constitution that there's something called the death sentence. But they crafted the Constitution in its totality in such a manner that it would be settled, this court would be settled with that question. And this court rose to the occasion and answered that question. I'm saying it is that species of an omission. It is not an omission which is ipso facto an exclusion, definitely. It may, as Justice Zondo says, be an oversight. But I go further to say it is of the genre that Justice Cameron is
I'm sorry, Mr. Mbofu. Isn't it that after the elections, Parliament sit? In the first sitting of Parliament, the President is elected.
Correct.
And that is why then, in the process of electing the President, the Constitution gives us the details as to how it should happen. But we know from Section 57 of the Constitution that Parliament is the master of its own procedures.
Correct.
So the drafters of the Constitution knew that after the first sitting, Parliament will adopt rules which would regulate its business. And in those rules, Parliament will deal with these issues. So it was left to Parliament to determine whether certain voting should be done by secret ballot or not. Isn't that the position, the structure of the Constitution?
No, it is not, Justice Shaft. Because if that was the case, then the section that deals with actually what's going to happen if the motion of no confidence carries. What will happen is that within the next month or so, the clock will be wound exactly back to June 2014. Even though Parliament has been there, it has done all its rules, but exactly the secret ballot vote that will happen for the replacement president is still going exactly. So that can never have been the motivation for the chapter 3, rather schedule 3.
Can I draw your attention to section 57?
57.
Let's look at section 57.
Yeah.
It says the National Assembly may determine and control its internal arrangements, proceedings, and procedures, and make rules and orders concerning its business, with due regard to representative and participatory democracy, accountability, transparency, and public involvement. The rules and orders of the National Assembly must provide for, and it lists a number of issues.
Yeah.
What does that tell us? Doesn't that tell us that the Constitution has left it to Parliament to determine these issues? More so, if you go to section 59, you'll see that section 59 does something that is not ordinarily done. Rights may be limited. Rights in the Bill of Rights may be limited by rules of Parliament in section 59, just to show that how important the drafters of the Constitution regarded rules of Parliament to be.
Yes.
Maybe before you answer, all the instances, all the countries you referred to, all the countries that Mr. Bartlander referred to, where voting was or is done by secret ballot, or courts spoke in support of voting by secret ballot, the rules of Parliament in all those jurisdictions make that provision. Just to support what, well, to add to what my brother has said.
Yes.
Parliament has itself, in all those instances, decided that this is how it's going to be done. And courts came in to interpret what Parliament, in the exercise of its constitutional power, had decided to do.
Chief Justice, I would differ slightly with that. In the case, for example, of Ghana, the Constitution prescribes a secret ballot. In the case of Korea,
the rules.
Well, Mr.
Same
Bartlander,
Botswana, Zimbabwe, Germany, all these other jurisdictions, the rules prescribe secret ballot, not the Constitution as such.
Well, in the case of Korea, not even the rules deal with the question. What happened in South Korea in 2016 is that, in actual fact, in the impeachment of the president there, a secret ballot was used.
But who decided?
Well,
was it the court or the parliament?
No, of course, it was not the court, but the rules, all I'm saying is that it's not as if the rules provided for that situation, which is exactly why it was challenged. That challenge failed.
Please allow me, Mr. Mpofu.
Sorry.
Who decided that it be done by secret ballot? Remember, we are dealing with my brother Jafta's question.
Yes.
It's like I'm a staff writer here.
Yes.
Who decided that it should be by secret ballot?
Well, the answer is it could have been Parliament itself. It could have been the Speaker. We don't know.
No, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The point I want to make is it is not the court that decided so.
No, of course.
It was an internal arrangement within Parliament itself. Is it not so?
Absolutely.
Now deal with my brother's question.
Yes.
With that understanding.
Yes. And by the way, before I deal with that question, that's exactly what the UDM was asking for. That's why we wrote a letter to the Speaker. It was not to say the court must decide. It was to say she must decide. And she failed to do so.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mpofu. It was, but is it for the Speaker to then decide under those circumstances, consistent with what I've drawn your attention to in relation to other jurisdictions? Is it not for the National Assembly?
Well, it is for the National Assembly, but the rules have delegated, for lack of a better word, that function to the Speaker. The rules say simply, at the direction of the Speaker, and I'm paraphrasing, at the direction of the Speaker, the procedure to be adopted will be imposed. So it's the same. The answer is the same. As court, please.
So your alternative argument is the one that you're relying on rather than the oversight issue, because that is the argument that I didn't understand.
Yes.
I understand the alternative argument to say the rules of Parliament permit the Speaker to direct that voting shall be by secret ballot.
Yes.
And therefore the Speaker was wrong in thinking that she doesn't have the power.
Absolutely. That's the argument. And what we then say, assuming that, well, in the alternative argument, what we say, Justice Jafta, is that in any event, Rule 104, properly interpreted, cannot be read in any other way but to permit a secret ballot. When that rule says, ordinarily, and I'm paraphrasing again, ordinarily, when the so-called electronic voting is done, then at the end of the meeting, the names and votes will be reflected in the minute. Then we know, all of us, what we're talking about. We're talking about an open ballot. But when the same rules say, if the method that has now been chosen by the Speaker permits for the names and votes to be reflected in the minutes, then this and that will happen. Then obviously, what that same rule is saying is that if, on the other hand, the method chosen by the Speaker does not permit for the names and the votes to be tallied, they will not be reflected in the minute. What is that, in short? A secret ballot. It is nothing else. Once you have a situation where the votes and the names are incapable of being tallied, in other words, it's undetectable whether Mr. Mpofu voted this way or that way, and for that reason, the votes cannot be reflected in the minutes. That is nothing else but the secret ballot. Whether that secret ballot is going to be achieved by throwing stones or raising hands or putting X on a piece of paper is irrelevant.
On a lighter note, Mr. Mpofu, I don't think if the National Assembly or the Rules Committee wanted to say secret ballot, they would have spoken in encrypted or coded terms. I think they would have been expressed, particularly in view of what the Constitution itself says. But that's on a lighter note.
No, I understand that, CJ. Unfortunately, even if it's on a lighter note, I'm going to address it. The issue there, Chief Justice, is that this is simply an exercise in interpretation. And all I'm saying about Rule 104 is that Rule 104, insofar as it contemplates anything that might, wherein the vote and the name might not be tallied, then that thing, in whatever form it comes, is a species of a secret ballot. Because a secret ballot is, I'm sorry, CJ, a secret ballot simply means we shall not be able to detect who voted what.
I've got a conceptual difficulty with the approach, but I think we have overburdened you.
Yeah.
I think the starting point should be, how do we interpret the message communicated by Section 1022 in relation specifically to the method of voting?
Yes.
And then you can then move from there to the rules. But for as long as it doesn't look like the National Assembly understands Section 1022 to be saying secret ballot or suggesting secret ballot, I'm not too sure that the rules themselves could go that far.
Fair enough.
But not for you not to answer the question, but I'm raising it for everybody else. Here is the question I want to raise. It relates to a Ghanaian case. Agyeidum, it's AGYEITWUM versus Attorney General. It is a 2005-2006 case, SCGLR, not R, I'm speaking Afrikaans now, SCGLR, page 752. Let me summarize the essence of it, and you don't have to comment on it, maybe in reply. It is this. Article 146, sub-articles 3 to 6 of the Ghanaian Constitution provides for a method a procedure to be followed in removing a judge from office and in removing the Chief Justice from office. As regards the judge, it says for anybody to petition the president to set up a committee that would look into the impeachability of a judge, there would have to be a prima facie case before further steps are taken. In other words, you must satisfy a committee of judges that there is a prima facie case. But for a Chief Justice, it's silent on that, meaning all you have to say is, listen, Mr. President, set up a committee, remove this person, and that's it, whether there is a prima facie case or not. Now, the Supreme Court of Ghana, which is the equivalent of this court, said a number of factors would have to be considered. One, you have to consider whether this is perhaps not one of the inadvertent gaps in the Constitution that must be filled. That is the first point. The second point is, in looking at this constitutional provision, we've got to check whether the underlying philosophy and core values of the Constitution points to the need to first establish a prima facie case or not, even if the Constitution is silent on it. And the third point is, you've got to be very careful about the literalist interpretation of the section. And four, it's important that purposive interpretation be given the weight that it deserves. That's the fourth point. And finally, whatever interpretation you ultimately settle for as a court, ask yourself a question, whether it does not perhaps lead to absurd consequences.
Absolutely.
So I'm raising it with you so that others can deal with it, and you can deal with it ultimately. But as you deal with it, remember that they were not there considering matters that fall squarely within the powers of Parliament. It was not a situation like ours where you have to, it is within the powers of Parliament to do something about it. But that said, when there is a thought or a belief that Parliament has not done what it is supposed to have done, is it permissible to bring that matter to the court and say, here is the Constitution. We are not asking you to do what Parliament is supposed to do. We are asking you to tell us the meaning of this section. Does it fall within our powers to say, this is the meaning, without saying to Parliament now, we are hereby ordering you to do X, Y, Z. We are just saying, this is the meaning. The meaning is either you have no choice but to hold the to conduct the ballot openly or secretly, or it's never permissible to entertain secret ballot. Can we interpret at least up to that extent? Or, as you seem to suggest and others, should we even take it a step further and say you are hereby ordered to do X, Y, Z without trenching separation of powers? But
yes,
I want you to take time and reflect on it and then respond later.
I will do so in reply, Chief Justice. Safe to say the following. If indeed we are dealing with what in that case is called a constitutional gap, then may I make this proposal? The court doesn't have to decide this, but it's just to extend the logic of interpretation. My submission would be that in the parlance of that case, here in this country, we actually have a situation which differentiates between those two situations. Section 89 of the Constitution says that if there's a prima facie case, to paraphrase, of a breach of the Constitution and so on, then the President, by a vote again, should be impeached. And in my respectful submission, every submission I've made now applies.
But that would be 2/3, isn't it?
Yes, that's the only difference, which is not relevant for current purposes. But a vote in my respectful submission in that section is the same as this. The only difference with this 102, because it's a removal is a removal. The only difference is that in section 102, you don't have to establish any wrongdoing. They can just wake up one day and say, look, because of the junk status as they've done now, we seek to remove you.
But you don't lose your benefits.
Absolutely. The two differences is the 2/3 and you don't lose your benefits. But it's exactly the same. The words are ringingly the same. The words that are used in section 89 are by a majority of a vote, or rather by 2/3 of a vote. In section 102, it's by a majority of a vote. In part 3 of the schedule, it says a vote by majority. So the words a vote, and that's just another rule of construction. If the words a vote are used throughout the same instrument, then at the very least, we must assume that they carry the same impact. But my preferred approach, Chief Justice, with the greatest respect to this thing, is to ask the rhetorical question, why was the secret ballot prescribed? It must have been prescribed to protect the integrity of the outcome of the election. Do we want to protect the integrity of the election here? Yes. What is the answer? The secret vote. That can only be, and then to turn it around is to say, why would we have a vote, quote unquote, by a method that will render that whole exercise useless? So-called party discipline, which is invoked, simply means that in the words of the Mazibuko case, it would be within the gift of the majority party as to whether vote succeeds or not. And that must be undesirable constitutionally, as it was stated.
It's not so called. As I understand, I think, is it Mr. Semenya, he says, in fact, a number of parties, including the one you represent, have the same position in its constitution in relation to not voting as instructed. He lists a number of them.
Yeah.
If you don't vote as instructed, there are consequences.
Well, with the
but that was just by the way. I'm just saying, I'm addressing the so-called.
The same rules apply. Let me address it as follows. Well, if that is the case, well, bad luck to them. It means their constitutions are unconstitutional. It's a contract. We cannot equate a contract between private parties in a voluntary association with the constitution of a country, with the greatest respect. So any party can wake up and have a constitution that says, for you to be a member of this party, you must go and stab people. That's their business. But as soon as that encroaches on the Constitution. In fact, to put it mildly, what President Motlanthe said, which is that it would not be misconduct, what he really, what I interpreted to mean is the following. If a person was expelled under those circumstances.
Sorry, Mr. Mbo. He hasn't filed any affidavit.
Fine.
Please.
But it's in the papers.
No,
okay,
please. There are a number of things in the papers that are not properly authenticated.
Right. Let's then do it in abstract.
Please.
If such a party, Chief Justice, were indeed to expel a person, and that person can come here and say, I was abiding by my oath of office, the result must be obvious. Because the party discipline story, that is its fault line. The oath that is taken, when those people stand up there.
Mr. Mpofu, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, Justice Foreman, sorry.
I just want to know what is the relevance of the content of the constitutions of political parties to the issue in this case?
Well, the only relevance is, the relevance is to the question of so-called, insofar as so-called party discipline has been invoked. Because party discipline is another word of saying party discipline is the Constitution.
How does party discipline come into the interpretation of the Constitution?
It comes as follows. Section 1D of the Constitution says that ours is a multi-party democracy. In the Ramakatsa case, it was then that notion was expanded to say the vehicle through which citizens.
I'm sorry, just explain to me, how would it be different for us in deciding this constitutional question if the party's constitution did not have any disciplinary measures following upon this, or if it does? How does it make any difference?
It doesn't. As I say, it's just a contract, a private contract, and it cannot implicate as far as the remedy is concerned.
Before you get to the remedy, Mr. Mpofu, I thought that following on the list that the Chief Justice gave earlier, and the recent case in Ghana, also following on the question by my brother Froneman earlier relating to parliamentary oversight, I thought that you'll go straight to what Mazibuko tells us in relation to how you read Section 102 of the Constitution. Let me take you quickly to those paragraphs. In paragraph 42 of Mazibuko, this court said the following: Section 102 must be understood Mazibuko.
I'm sorry.
Section 102 must be understood also in light of other related provisions, and one of them is Section 1D of the Constitution that talks about the multi-party system, but you have to go further, that it deals also with the need to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. The other provisions is Section 57(1)(b) of the Constitution that also provides for a participatory democracy, accountability, transparency, and public involvement. Now, in this judgment, the court says significantly, Section 42(3) of the Constitution provides, I'll read that provision, the National Assembly is elected to represent the people and to ensure government by the people under the Constitution. It does this by choosing the president, by providing a national forum for public consideration of issues, by passing legislation, and by scrutinizing and overseeing executive action. Emphasize by overseeing executive action. Now, the relevant paragraphs that I'm going to read, I'd like you to bear them in mind when you reply later, and also the other counsel, if they can address us on the issue of the effectiveness of parliamentary oversight over the executive when you deal with issues relating to the voting by the issues of motion of no confidence. Now, in paragraph 43, the court says the following, and I think it is pertinent. In the first instance, the Assembly is elected to represent the people and to ensure government by the people under the Constitution. A motion of no confidence in the President is a vital tool to advance our democratic hygiene. It affords the Assembly a vital power and duty to scrutinize and oversee executive action. The Constitution does not set a time or preconditions for when the Assembly may vote on a motion of no confidence in the President. The ever-present possibility of a motion of no confidence against the President and the Cabinet is meant to keep the President accountable to the Assembly, which elects her or him. If a motion of no confidence in the President were to succeed, he or she and the incumbent Cabinet must resign. In effect, the people, through their elected representatives in the Assembly, will end the mandate they bestowed on an incumbent President. The last part. The right that flows from Section 102(2) is central to the deliberative multi-party democracy envisioned in the Constitution. It implicates the values of democracy, transparency, accountability, and openness. A motion of this kind is perhaps the most important mechanism that may be employed by Parliament to hold the executive to account and to interrogate executive performances. I close quote.
Yes.
Now, as we interpret these provisions, having regard to what I've read to you, having regard to the constitutional imperatives relating to the effectiveness of parliamentary oversight over the executive, and also taking in mind what the Chief Justice has just read to us about the Ghanaian Constitutional Court, given the fact that we may find that the rules do not make provision for motion of confidence by way of secret ballot, is it not open to us to interpret the Constitution purposefully, having regard to all these constitutional imperatives, to find that the Speaker does have a discretion?
Yes. The short answer is yes, Deputy Chief Justice. But more importantly, my learned colleague, Mr. Maineche, for the Institute for Security Studies, will deal with what I've dubbed the doctrine of effectiveness, which is what one of the things you have raised. But let me just say this. If we all agree, as we should, that this is the most vital tool and all the words that are used in Mazibuko, then on the other extreme, we can then jump in our interpretation thereof to literally making it toothless and all the other adjectives that have been used. In other words, when this court, with respect, interprets that section, it will have to take into account, this is the same as what Justice Cameron was alluding to. What was said in Makwanyane is that the Constitution elevates the right to life. In fact, Chaskalson and I think O'Regan J said the right to life and the right to dignity are rights which are elevated to a particular plane. And therefore, in interpreting the Constitution, that has to be taken into account. Again here, if this is the most effective tool and so on, then in interpreting it, the court, with respect, must then make sure purposively that it looks at the purpose of the section, one, but also what I said earlier, the purpose of the protection of a secret ballot. What are those two things telling us? The purpose of the section, it must give us the best accountability, the most accountability, the qualitatively speaking. But so on the one hand, but the purpose of the Constitution bringing such a thing as a secret ballot is to protect the voters from the potential of blunting, rendering toothless, ineffective, and so on, that very vital instrument. So I agree that the interpretation must take into account two things. One, that in Mazibuko, the court accepted that it is the members and not, in fact, the court articulated in those words, it is the members and not the political parties that must determine. So that must mean, in the context of the oath, that when those members have taken the oath to say, we will uphold, I, not we, I, Dalimpofu, will uphold the Constitution and so on. The minute they do that, then they are saying what they're going to be doing is going to be according to their conscience. Those who are religious take the oath, the others take the affirmation. Both are saying the same thing. Our conscience is going to guide us and nothing else. Not what the views of our church, not the views of our political party, not the views of this one or that one, but our conscience. And to give meaning, literally, to give meaning to that, we are humbly saying to this court, in fact, you cannot give meaning to all that without having the secret ballot.
You are 3 minutes short.